started. Where did my notes go? All right. So, today we're going to be talking about ancient Egyptian forgeries and fakes in the art world. There is obviously a big difference between the words fake and forgery, and I'm going to say forgery doesn't necessarily mean the exact same context of ancient Egyptian art that it means for other pieces of art. Mainly that's because we don't have any like named artists from ancient Egypt as we do with like Van Gogh, Degas, things like that. So for ancient Egypt, this is mainly people forging things from a particular time period or making duplicates of another piece that exists, or they might like throw on a cartouche or some sort of text to make it more legit, rather than like directly copying an art style of a particular artist, because again, in ancient Egypt we don't technically have particular artists. So we're first going to go through a brief history of the trade of fakes and forgeries and when we see them beginning to appear. And then we're going to go through some museums that have openly talked about the fakes and forgeries that they have in their collection. And then we're specifically going to look at Egyptian pieces. There are countless more, but we're just going to go for a couple smaller museums essentially that I found, which I thought were interesting the way they talk about their forgeries. Finally, we're going to look at a series of the most famous forgery pieces and the scandals that have emerged in the art world, as well as the backlash that surrounds it when the news breaks. And I also want you guys to think of it like a critical eye. I want you guys to think of what fakes and forgeries really are, and if the ethical kind of like complications of them, like what is considered a fake, and are they good, are they bad, are they things that never should be made before? Because technically replicas are fakes. So what's the difference between a replica and a fake or a forgery? We're gonna kind of talk about that more in the conclusion, but I kind of want you to have that on your mind and think about how it is. It is a fake. That's the thing. And I will say, if anybody's interested in learning more about this is the book. As you can see, Melissa read a book, guys. I didn't read the whole book, but I read most of the book. You guys would be you guys should genuinely be proud of me, because I never read anymore, and it's like very annoying. But when I found this it was on Amazon for like $8. I actually was having trouble finding some more information, like generally about ancient Egyptian fakes and stuff. So this book really helped. I find it really easy to read. It's not really that like technical or academic, but it's really interesting. I wish the pictures were in color. That's like the only thing that I wish, because everything's in like a deep tone sepia in the entire book. But it is a really good book for this topic. So let's go into the history of fakes and forgeries. It's honestly not very surprising that a lot of these fakes and forgeries are going to appear at the same time that Egypt is opened to the rest of the world, and thus when sort of the first waves of Egyptomania is occurring. But there are also some examples that we're talking about. Thank you so much! We are talking about ancient Egyptian fakes and forgeries at season 3. We're kicking off season 3 of the MelissainDeNile lecture series today. We're also over on Twitch live, so feel free, ask any questions throughout it, and enjoy the lecture. So I do, Jack. I go live on Twitch 3 times a week. And then most of the time I also try to go live on TikTok, but when I'm playing games, sometimes TikTok doesn't always carry over as well. But I always try to go live for our discussion streams and our lecture streams, which we typically do on the weekend. If you join our Discord, the link is in my bio on TikTok. You'd be able to see the schedule that I post there. I try to post it on other platforms too, but usually I'm the best at posting it on Discord. You're very welcome. I'm so glad, Jack. Okay, Silver's the first question. Is it considered a fake and forgery if it was made in antiquity, or are we only discussing modern copies today? We are only discussing modern things today, because I don't think anything that is made in antiquity would be considered a fake or a forgery, unless they are technically No, yeah, I don't think if it's made in antiquity. Although we are going to talk about antiquity that's not ancient Egypt right in a second. Anything that is made in ancient Egypt is still going to be in antiquity. So the fakes and forgeries that we are talking about are more modern people conning tourists, typically. Tourists and collectors, museums, things like that. But yeah, so we are technically only going to be discussing modern copies, minus what I'm going to say right now. Is it a fake? It was made by aliens. Yes, because aliens are fake. So the trade of fake antiquities, not just Egyptian ones, started with travel souvenirs in the 18th century, typically for the young men who were doing their quote-unquote grand tour of Europe and other parts of the world, as they would take home small copies of the great masters, usually paintings and statues. And then if they did go to Egypt, some of those things would also fall into it. If they were rich enough, though, I will also mention, they're going to be buying real antiquities as well. It just kind of depends. Now, while most people are going to attribute the first wave of Egyptomania to the Napoleonic campaign in the very, very end of the 1700s, there actually is earlier waves of Egyptomania, and thus earlier waves of these fakes/forgeries. And the first one we're actually going to talk about is the Phoenicians. So the Phoenicians had a they were obviously contemporary to the ancient Egyptians, but they were creating their own Egyptonizing amulets, scarabs, decorative objects that then they were using and spreading throughout the Med. And essentially, because they are contemporary, you might look at this and you say, oh, but how do we know that the Phoenicians weren't just trading with the Egyptians and that these are an Egyptian thing owned by a Phoenician? Well, when you look into these objects, you can notice little things that don't make sense and don't fall along with the ancient Egyptian styles and the ancient Egyptian art canon. And I will say many of these Egyptonizing objects were found in Etruscan tombs excavated in the 19th century. So this is the bronze plate that is coming from a tomb in a city called Palestrina. And you can see there is like so many things that are just screaming, this is Egypt. This is made by Egyptians. You have the smiting scene in the center with the like attendant walking behind. You have the winged sun disk. You have a little falcon. You have like a battle scene. You have the Master of Animals motif almost. Offering scenes. This one is slightly different. You have boat scenes with looks like Ra and Osiris, and suckling scenes as well. Suckling scenes are even included with big scarabs and again another smiting scene. And these ones even have little cartouches and have hieroglyphs that go all along the edges. So you might say, well, that's Egyptian, obviously. But for those in the know, Egyptians didn't really make bronze bowls like this. These are motifs that you see in other mediums, and they don't really make bowls like this. There are a few, and granted, could these be things that have not survived because they're made out of metal and could have been melted down for other things? Yes, that is also possible. But if you look at this one at the bottom, there is actually a Phoenician name on the bottom of this bowl, and it is probably the name of the artist, which, as we know, is extremely uncommon for ancient Egyptians to sign their work, let alone in, I hate to say it, I don't know enough about the Phoenicians, whatever language this is, which is not obviously Egyptian, even though they have these Egyptian motifs and other hieroglyphs on it. Now, here's the thing. Are these necessarily forgers, as we think of today, or people creating fakes? Or are these contemporary people to the Egyptians who essentially liked other aspects of their own of other cultures and other cultures' art and copied it. While I would say the Egyptians never admitted it, they did this all the time. There are so many motifs that they took from Mesopotamians, things like the Master of Animals motif, things like rosettes. There's a lot of little tiny motifs that the ancient Egyptians absolutely stole from other people. And granted, is it stealing? Is it just copying? Is it just like all the semantics of it? But borrowed or took were inspired by are many of the words that you can say for this. So the Phoenician stuff is some evidence of this actually. Yes, the spiral motifs, yes, absolutely. And so there's a lot of taking and pulling from these contemporary peoples. And so it's like, are these really forgers? Or are these people who are Egyptomaniacs in this sense? That they are actually like, oh, we love this. We love this, and I want that bowl in my house. So they are like, hey, have you been to Egypt? Have you seen some of the Egyptian stuff? Can you make me a bowl like that for my house? And someone's like, yeah, sure. It's not gonna be perfect, but hey man, it probably is gonna be cheaper because they're not gonna have to import it. So, food for thought. Here are some other Phoenician fakes that I found. These are all at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and these were great. I was so shocked when I saw these because I was like, oh, like they really liked Egyptian stuff. But these are all like ever so slightly, these look wrong. Yeah, Egyptomaniacs, absolutely. Egyptomania is one of my favorites. I have a whole lecture on it that I've done a couple times, and Egyptomaniacs is a great word. This is a blinder for like a horse, and it has this beautiful winged sphinx with a winged cobra and the sun disk and a cartouche and a lotus flower and such. But this is like, this actually looks very Egyptian to me. If I had ever actually seen them using horse blinders, I'm sure they did, but I feel like we don't have as many preserved to kind of compare it to actual Egyptians. Obviously, this scarab looks exactly like an ancient Egyptian scarab, but when you actually press it in here, thank you so much for the follow. When you press it in here, this is not what some ancient Egyptian scarabs might look like this, but it has these two winged goddesses in front of, I can't tell, it might be Osiris, like a mummy or something. It just doesn't look like typical scarabs, because scarabs are either usually have a full cartouche, like a cartouche of a king, or it will have a spiral motifs. It sometimes is going to have like a full image, like a full thing, but not all the time. And then this piece is just absolutely gorgeous. I think it is made out of ivory. I'm not 100% sure what it is. Like I have to look deeper into it. But it's these beautiful imagery of these two pharaohs, and they actually are almost doing a sematawi, which is the tying of the plant from northern Egypt and the plant from southern Egypt. Thank you, Dr. Hubs. It's their own language. That's good to know, because I wasn't sure. I was like suddenly thinking of linear B and linear A, and I was like, that's not it. That's Greek. But yeah, so in the Phoenician language. Interesting that it relates to Hebrew. But yeah, so they're almost doing this kind of uniting, tying, and any like regular person who's not obsessed with Egypt would look at this and say, oh wow, that's like really Egyptian. Like they have the crowns, they have the like uraeus, there's the cornice and the snakes and stuff. But anyone who's like really like the art historians of Egypt would look at this and be like, it is very Egyptian inspired, but it's very bad, quote unquote, in that sense that it's like, it's not in proportion. The crowns are so small. Like, what is this, depicting two kings in front of each other? It's like, it doesn't stylistically make as much sense when you're looking at ancient Egyptian art. But these are just some amazing of these like Egyptonizing items that the Phoenicians created for their, pretty much just because they were interested and they really liked it. Then you also have the things that the Greeks and the Romans made. Now, obviously, a lot of the things that the Greco-Romans who are living in Egypt are still, they're not going to be, what's it called? They're not going to be considered fakes and forgeries because they are pieces from antiquity. But I do also want to mention it that like these are not fakes, but these are other cultures making their own decisions about ancient Egyptian art and using ancient Egyptian art to kind of talk about it. And so I would not consider these fakes and forgeries because they are made in those time periods. Like they are made then. But you do have these things that appear to be Egyptian, but are not Egyptian, are Egyptian inspired almost. So you kind of have to know the difference between if I'm looking at a fake and a forgery, or am I looking at an Egyptonizing object that doesn't come from the Egyptian pharaonic period. So in some cases we have the cult of Isis was very prominent outside of Egypt. Technically, honestly, it was kind of more prominent outside of Egypt and more long-lasting outside of Egypt than it was in Egypt. And so we have these Greek imagery of the goddess Isis with the sistrum and with a really, really small sun disk on her head, and these beautiful Isis Aphrodite statues that have been found in a lot of different places. And then you also have these pieces, and if you guys watched us play Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, you will recognize this statue because this is the statue that is featured in like every single tomb in Giza in the game, which is hysterical because it's not an Egyptian statue, it's a statue of Antinous. So within the Greeks and the Romans definitely were Egyptomaniacs in some senses, and they kind of go in two different waves. One wave being the cult of Isis, and then another wave being after the death of Hadrian's lover Antinous in Egypt. He drowns in the Nile. He drowns in the Nile, and Hadrian is so in love with this man that he makes him a god, pretty much, and dedicates cities to him, like Antinopolis, and many different statues of him being depicted as Egyptian or as an Egyptian pharaoh. Hi, Nat. Welcome on in. You haven't missed much, I promise. We're just getting into the history of ancient Egyptian fakes. But yeah, so you have these like very Egyptian, like, or very, in the more case, very Roman. My favorite part about this statue is that it has these little things inside of its hand, which is so common for like ancient Egyptian pharaohs and officials and stuff to be holding this random like rod, like something about just as long as their fist. Man, I know, because he's not, but like, I just love how they've added that into us, even though we still sort of don't know what they are. There's a lot of theories and stuff. Daily Life of the Phoenicians is a book that it put me to sleep, so dense and fascinating. I hate to say it, then that's low on my list then. But again, these are not necessarily fakes, obviously, because they were actually made in the Greco-Roman period, but these are mainly made out of admiration and wanting to convey something, or the aspect of that they wanted to convey something that is more Egyptian, some sort of meaning, subtle meaning that has to do with the Egyptians. And so these are kind of the two first original waves of Egyptomania in which art is then produced, but they're most likely not, in this case, fakes. It's just, sometimes, I hate to say it, you might see this and somebody be like, that's a fake, and then you realize, no, actually, if you look into it more, it would not be considered a fake. It's not this random amalgamation of two different cultures. It actually has big significance for it. All right. Water. Ooh. All right. So, Egypt itself was not really in the, we're going to say, Western public interest, but global public interest, essentially until the Napoleonic campaign in the late 1790s. Paranoid, this is not AI art. This is a painting of the Battle of the Pyramids. I would never use AI art, just so everybody knows this. I would absolutely never use AI art. But there is something called the Battle of the Pyramids. I don't know the strict details, and I don't know how close they were to the pyramids, but it is an actual event that happened during the Napoleonic campaign when Napoleon invades Egypt. There are two battles. I think there's a Battle of the Nile and the Battle of the Pyramids. Or there's probably more battles than that, but I think there are two main battles. So this is kind of when, this is in like 1790, 1798, I think, where essentially after Napoleon comes in to Egypt, he thus then opens it up to the world, and he is able to bring in all of these savants, which I have a whole guest lecture with our friend Caroline on my YouTube if you want to watch to learn more about the Napoleonic campaign in Egypt and the savants. It's a really great lecture. We learned so much. But this was like the first major wave of Egyptomania, because people were so fascinated and just did not kind of expect what pretty much Europeans came in and found. The vast majority of people were not able to go to Egypt themselves, so this is when the market starts to open for copies, fakes, and forgeries. And what is truly odd to think about is that at this time, a lot of the greatest and largest museums that we know today did not even exist. Essentially, between 1815 and 1830, the consuls of the great European powers established in Egypt had been granted excavation concessions, which was a permit, essentially, by the Viceroy of Egypt to create these large collections that you see now in the museums. So, for example, the Egyptian Museum in Turin was founded in 1824 thanks to an acquisition of the King of Sardinia. The British Museum is a little bit older, it's 1753, but its Egyptian pieces obviously did not come in until after the 1790s, mainly through two collections purchased by an Egyptian consul in Egypt named Henry Salt. And in 1827, the Department of Egyptian Antiquities at the Louvre was founded, though at the time it was called the Musée Charles X, because it's in his house. In his mansion is what the Louvre is. Hi, hand down by Sharon. Welcome. We're doing a lecture about fakes and forgeries in ancient Egypt today, so we're chatting about that. Feel free to ask any questions throughout. So the interesting thing about this time period is that it really sort of depended on your class and your availability to be able to purchase items. So just as the taste for legitimate art from ancient Egypt was emerging, there was also the forgers that are coming up on the side of them to potentially scam people and sell items that were not actually authentic. So the first mass-produced market of fakes appears in the 1820s. And I will note, these are both made in Egypt and in Europe. And even the experts, the Egyptologists at the time, were noticing that there was a proliferation of forgeries as early as 1826. Jean-Jacques Riffaud, who helped put together the collection at the Turin Egyptian Museum, noticed that other collections would contain numerous counterfeits, including those that largely came from Italy. In his memoirs, he warns against the speculators of antiquities from Italy, as they have, quote, infected the land with these falsifications. They know just how to palm them off to the so-called antiquaries who frenzied from collections through speculation and reap very great profits. I will lower it. Thank you. Give me 2 seconds. Actually, wait, no. I'm gonna do that. Let me lower it. Always tell me if the music is too low or too high, because everybody knows Melissa doesn't know how to do audio. So always tell me if it's too low or too high, or if I'm too loud or too. But yeah, always feel free to tell me, because I don't know how to do audio. I need a sticker like that says Melissa doesn't know how to do audio. Okay, where was I? All right. I want to give a really great example of kind of the whole process of a forger conning a buyer. And this is a great story from a Parisian getting fooled by a seller in Egypt that he wanted to buy a monolith statue of King Ramses III. So this antiquary wanted this massive statue to be put in his courtyard in his house in France. And pretty much he was just going around and telling everybody and anybody about it, trying to see if there was any contacts for people. And he was just like any statue. He didn't really even want an Egyptian statue. He just wanted something ancient to buy. And so this unnamed informant essentially found him and told him about a basalt statue of Ramses III that was secretly retrieved from a temple at Thebes. Because this middleman knew how much the Parisian wanted it, he convinced his agent in Egypt to keep the find hidden. And this is crazy though, because obviously like the temples in Egypt have been open for so long, and it's just like hysterical thinking that someone's just like, I found this massive monolith statue, but I'm gonna hide it away because I know I can sell it for a good buck. So he wanted to sell it for 100,000 francs, and there was a photo provided. It appeared to be in good condition, so the Parisian put a down payment of 10,000 francs, and it was getting shipped to France. It arrived in Marseille by train, and after then he paid the whole sum, and it came to his house. It was the same thing that he had seen in the photo. It had Egyptian hieroglyphs. And you will remember, this is in the sometime 1820s, Egyptian hieroglyphs had not really been translated at this point. So at this point, nobody could really read them, or we are kind of emerging towards when they could be read. And so you always have to kind of remember that, like, they have no idea, like, who this is. We know now that it was that this supposedly was Ramses III, but at the moment, they don't really know. So then, the Parisian then invites experts to come and see his giant monolith, and unfortunately they were concerned with the stylistic details and the modern tool marks on the statue. The final blow is that they discovered the basalt was not basalt, but it was actually slate, and it was from the city of Angers, which is a city in France. And essentially, an investigation discovered that the informant was totally left, was completely gone, and there was a workshop that was very close to the Parisian's house that had fragments of the exact same block. And essentially what is discovered is that the alleged time that it took to get from Egypt to France was the amount of time that the forger, literally in his neighborhood, needed to create the piece after one that was in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, which is probably where the picture came from. So the vast majority of all of these fakes and forgeries are going to be marketed to the upper class tourists, as well as those who can't go to Egypt themselves. And obviously during this time, the very, very high upper class could go to places like this to actually purchase real pieces. Oh, Baha, we're going to talk about that. Absolutely. Forgers are very talented artists. We are going to talk about that with one of the scandals, because even though how much I kind of hate this guy, these forgers are artists. Absolutely they are. Yes, we cannot really doubt that at all. And it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate that they do something that is technically illegal. So, there's also a really great quote from an Egyptologist named Albert Clerk, who witnessed a lot of the manufacturing of forgeries in Egypt when he was living in Cairo. And I'm going to read a portion of his letter, if I can find the page, because it was too long to type. All right, it's a very long letter. I'm only going to read the first paragraph because it's too detailed. Only about the last 3 or 4 years have seen the production of a rather large number of fake antiquities. Before that, genuine antiquities and antiquities could be had for a very moderate price. Since 1843 in particular, a large number of travelers and tourists, more or less capable of seeing what they came to see, have swarmed in and around the catacombs, hypogea, caves. The English tourists in particular have ruined everything. What, for Christ's sake, was to be done in order to supply antiquities to so many amateurs, interested, and curious parties? How does one find divinities, statuettes, and scarabs? How does one find them when they are not to hand, either by looking for or by making them, the latter being the faster option? Yeah, and so then he actually goes into the actual, like, how all of these different pieces are made. And so he goes in, like, how wooden forgeries were made and how these types of forgeries were made, and such. And so we're very lucky from some of these Egyptologists and people who lived in Egypt at the time, because they really do give us a great insight into what was happening at that time, and sometimes even talk to these artists as well. So the onset of mass tourism to Egypt in the late 19th century is really what started off the fake market. And another part that really constricted this market was the adoption of a restrictive policy regarding the sale of antiquities, which caused the phenomena of forgery to increase in scale. I'm not 100% sure on what the rules were, but I believe one of the rules was certain places like the image that you see here, who would be selling these antiquities, was sort of allowed to keep running and keep selling items unless essentially the Egyptian government came in and saw that there was an object that there was not an example of in the Cairo Museum, and those things would be confiscated and those things would not be allowed to be purchased, because they saw it as trying to form essentially a one of everything type of collection, which honestly is pretty good, but I don't know how much that was really enforced and how much things essentially got passed, and I'm sure lots of things did. So while there are pieces that are very obviously replicas and fakes that would be marketed specifically as souvenirs, there are also pieces that were marketed as real antiquities that were forgeries. There were always these pieces that were marketed as souvenirs rather than actual pieces. No problem, Nat. We'll see you in a bit. I believe in you. I believe in your quiz. Do good. So one of the best experts of this time period, specifically looking at fakes and forgeries, is somebody named Dr. T.J. Wakeling. He was an English doctor who spent a few decades living in Cairo in the late 19th century. He also authored the first book entirely devoted to fakes of pharaonic inspiration. Through his job as a doctor, he was allowed to get in close contact with the local population. And he essentially developed a passion for fake artifacts made for the benefit of the throngs of European and American tourists that began to inundate Egypt each winter. I know, love. I believe in you. You can do it. It is your decision to do a PhD. So Dr. Wakeling, having gained the trust of local merchants, he would essentially purchase at preferential rates the best fakes on their books. In 1912, he then published the results of essentially his systematic prospecting, entitled Forged Egyptian Antiquities. So, according to the doctor, construction of the fine hotels and beautiful houses in the second half of the 19th century actually had an influence on the production of forgeries, as it triggered the arrival of Italian craftsmen specialized in the manufacture of molds for plasterwork decoration in something called scagliola, or the imitation of stone for pillars or wall panels. Hi, Alex. I almost said hi, Mel. That's stupid. That's my name. And so these instructors were actually excellent forgers and probably prided themselves on copying genuine antiquities and then teaching others how to do so. And so this doctor was able to essentially talk to all of these forgers and these artists very candidly and get insight into how and why these pieces were made. For example, he talked to an artist in Gurna, which was a village on the other side of the Nile from Thebes, where a lot of tombs are now, so the village does not exist. And he would make wooden models of tombs and statuettes by taking old coffins from mummies, dipping them in a semi-liquid plaster, and then painting them based on genuine models. So weirdly, this guy is adapting a ancient piece and making it something new. And so it is a very interesting way of doing it. But it was very, very unique, very unique. Hi, Claire. So the doctor actually used a very simple method to detect modern pieces versus ancient pieces, and he would actually smell the fake artifact, which would give off a different odor than the genuine pieces. Because a lot of these pieces were purposely made to look old by either like covering them in clay or dirt or rubbing bitumen to it to actually make it smell like mummies or smell like things like that. And it's a very, very interesting tactic to really deceive people rather than just like doing it because you love to copy ancient Egyptian art, sort of. All right. Additionally, it also appears that many of these local craftsmen didn't necessarily hide that they were making forgeries or fakes. A lot of these artists' names have actually kind of gone down in history, like Abed Rahim, who made exquisite gold rings with royal cartouches, or the artist from Gurna, who made fine quality engraved scarabs named Suleiman Ibrahim. And I will also mention that when it comes to fooling actual archaeologists and Egyptologists, many of these pieces did not. We are going to talk about some of the scandals tend to be ones that did fool somebody originally and then it was later found out. But a lot of these pieces were not looked at because these people were not trying to sell these to archaeologists in a lot of ways. Sometimes they were, but they were mainly trying to sell it to tourists who didn't know any better and didn't know anything about ancient Egyptian art or anything. And so some of these pieces did end up in large collections and such, but many of these were probably originally shown to Egyptologists and then passed off to somebody who didn't have as much experience. There was also an edict in 1835 that further restricted the trade of antiquities in Egypt, and then also essentially founded the Egyptian Antiquities Department and the Permanent Collection in Cairo. Both of those were started in 1858. So that rule that I mentioned earlier, that's after this point, but when it comes to more of these pictures, which are not obviously from the 1800s. So, this essentially meant that archaeologists and Egyptologists, for the first time, were actually led to purchase pieces on the market for themselves or the institutions that employed them. Anytime prior to then, they had been able to take a lot of these pieces out of Egypt, and now, like essentially with no rules, like they were able to just kind of take them out. And now they needed to kind of go through more hoops to jump. And so it was technically more easy to purchase from a peddler on the street or a market in Cairo than actually go through all those hoops. So there's also a really funny story when Albert Lithgow, who was an Egyptologist, bought several pottery houses or soul houses from a local peddler and showed them to the Egyptologist George Reisner, who worked for Boston and sorry, I have to text this. I now have to wake up earlier tomorrow. No, it's fine. I knew my coworkers would want to get coffee, so now we're getting up earlier. Hopefully the Dunkin's open that early. I'm gonna say make sure the Dunkin's. have to meet them at 6:30. And honestly, I'm not sure on a Sunday if it's open that early. All right. So, sorry, the funny story I was telling. So, Albert Lithgow bought some pottery houses or soul houses, which are not very common in ancient Egyptian art, but they are like, they're really, it's weird. They're kind of more common in like other cultures, like Asian cultures. These little tiny soul houses, they're meant to like look like little houses. But Egypt, they're not, you don't see them all the time. I think Middle Kingdom is when they're kind of common. And so they bought these and he showed them to George Reisner, and George Reisner loved the red color of them and he really liked them, but several weeks later the houses had actually melted away due to a heavy downpour, and it turns out they essentially had been shaped out of mud by the potters of Deir al-Balis, and they had not actually been like baked, so they were just like raw, like dried mud. And then Reisner has also had purchased some items from an individual multiple times until he finally decided to deny a gold ring of Horemheb because they thought the hieroglyphs were a little bit wrong. And it turns out it was from a well-known counterfeiter, and they saw the ring in a shop in Luxor, so he knew that the owner had been tricked by that particular forger. Some paranoid, not a lot. Most of them have been semi-stylistically, but there are some exceptions for looking at certain materials that would not have been available to the ancient Egyptians, or certain techniques that would not have been available to them. Nothing like, I haven't read anything about like fully like C14 dating at all, but I've read about like looking deeper in the techniques, and because now you have microscopes and things like that, you can figure it out. We're going to talk about a couple of those. Yeah. Okay. Fake tomb. Now this is AI art because I meant it to be. This is some really crappy AI art, but yes. So I think this is like the craziest twist in like the fake and forgeries market, because there have been fake tombs that have been discovered with fake objects inside of it. Yes, we're going to talk about that, Star. So while the purpose of these fake tombs are not always clear, they appear to be usually being used as a scam by local Egyptians to essentially let tourists discover, like literally quote unquote discover, a brand new tomb, and then offer to them if they would like to purchase or take any of the items from the tomb. Like letting them sort of be an archaeologist, which is very weird. And I haven't heard of it actually like working. Like I haven't heard, like, we have discovered these tombs, but we have not really heard of like this actually working, minus the story that I'm going to tell, but this is from 1901. So George Reisner told a story about in the spring of 1901 about an antiquary from Luxor who was scammed by a fake tomb. This young antiquary was visited by a couple of distant relatives who he knew sold fakes from time to time, but the antiquary wanted to buy some real artifacts, and he wanted to guarantee that they were authentic. One of the brothers says, "Hey, would you be satisfied if you actually saw them in the sealed tomb?" And he's like, "Of course, yeah." He's like, "In a sealed tomb, of course I would be satisfied that they're authentic." And so the brother said, "Hey, we actually happen to have stumbled upon a tomb that seems to be undisturbed. We should go and figure it out." And it would, but to me, that sets a precedent that people can just go out and do that. Which is not okay. Like, go out and look for stuff, go out and dig for stuff, which is why dig days themselves are not that common anymore. They used to be a big thing. Yes, like, I think there are ways that it can be done, but it does leave an awful precedent that, like, people can just go out and dig wherever they want and take items and stuff. So in my opinion, it would pretty much be an archaeology day where you pay, you're actually like you're going and doing excavations, which there are plenty of those, and field schools and stuff. But having a fake one is hard because it implies a lot of things, and I don't want people to get the wrong impression. I've talked about this before because it's just really hard to. This is something we talk about at work a lot with my archaeology museum, because it's like people always ask to come and volunteer to dig, and they don't have the experience, and it's too much training, and we don't have any place that they can dig, and it's just so complicated. So complicated. All right. So these brothers tell this antiquary that they have a tomb. It seems to be undisturbed. They found it. Let's go in. So they go to this tomb outside of Luxor. They remove brick by brick to discover essentially a cache of marvels. Tons and tons of things in this place. And essentially they negotiate a price with the antiquary, and he took all of the items that were in this tomb to his home. And eventually, Sir Wallace Budge, who is a purchaser for the British Museum, the curator of the British Museum, worked for the Egyptian Antiquities Fund for a while, he's in Luxor. So the antiquary hurries to try to see him and talk to him about the beautiful pieces from his tomb to potentially sell them. And he has to show one of Budge's friends first, and he shows one of the items. It's a little stela, and he shows it to Budge's friend, and Budge's friend is like, it's a fake. But it's a fake. And this poor guy doesn't believe him, because obviously he's like, I saw the actual tomb, like I know it's real. So then he prompted him to take it to Budge, and Budge also says it's fake. And then he ends up showing Budge and the Budge's friend everything that was found, and it turns out every single piece was fake. And essentially, the unfortunate thing is that this man had put himself in debt because he had mortgaged his land to pay for everything in the tomb. And of course, the two brothers vanish to another village. And this is a story that was somebody told George Reisner in 1901. And so you think that is like a unique thing, like that is dating back to that time where people can be scammed. And you'd be wrong. Because this tomb was found in 2023 in Beni Suef. This is just south of the Fayum Oasis, which honestly, again, really, really puts in this question as to what the heck this tomb is about. Or like why you make a fake tomb, because like this isn't even in like a super touristy area. Granted, could you build a fake tomb in a very touristy area? Probably not. But like, what is the point of it? Like, I really don't get it. And I forgot I was also going to find, there's some TikTok videos that I stitched a while back that's a different fake tomb that somebody is like making all of these videos. Yes, I believe those are supposed to be gold bars. Yeah, absolutely. You are absolutely like paranoid. I looked at it the first time, I said Jenga, and then I looked into it, and it's actually The Collector. We just talked about that. So the book I read was this one by Jean-Jacques Fleischer, but he recommends Wakeling, and we just talked about that and the thing. But yeah, I didn't know about Wakelings until I read this book and stuff. No, Egyptian. This is a great question, Baha. No, Egyptian gold was in circles. They were in these rings, and no, it was tubes. They're in these like tubes. So no, they are not in Egyptian bars. Thank you, Haven Soul, for the follow. But yeah, so this is my whole lecture tonight is about fakes and forgeries, mainly because I want to talk about some of the scandals that we're coming up to. But yeah, so we're talking about all the different fakes and forgeries in ancient Egypt. Not all of them. There's so many things. I didn't read the full book because there are more in here that I didn't have time to talk about, but I'm talking about the big ones. So yeah, so this was 2023. It's in Beni Suef. It is a 10-meter long tunnel with 3 rooms carved out into the mountain. And again, yes, these are supposed to be fake gold bars. Obviously, we have statues, and honestly, I remember thinking about this. This is not that bad, but I'm sure the hieroglyphs are not accurate, and like it just doesn't follow any sort of convention. Um, Here's the former Minister of Antiquities in the tomb, and one of the pictures of the, honestly, quite beautiful. Again, like I would buy that. Like that is something that I would have in my house and stuff. Um, but uh, but yeah, so the actual walls are made out of plywood. Rather than like the actual wall, which is why they're so like flat. And then it turns out the vast majority of the statues in sarcophagi are proved to be either made out of plastic or plaster. Like this one you can tell is like plaster and stuff. And many of them were like more or less than 1 year old and may have even been like purchased from the like tourist markets, like in the tourist cities. But yes, the gold plated plaster ingots were there as well. Sorry, I'm catching up on chat. Yeah, molds. Molds are. It's hard when you get a mold and then you are able to do it, but it's the material as well. Yeah, plywood. Isn't that amazing? Yeah, this was so funny. I remember when this news dropped. I made an Egypt news video about it because it was crazy. So yeah, so here's the thing, is that people were arrested for this, I do believe, but I cannot figure out what the point of this tomb was. It's definitely not meant to scam experts at this point, Paranoid. You're right. This is not meant to scam experts. I have heard that these tombs are made more to scam tourists and to kind of give rich tourists like essentially a day as an archaeologist and discover a tomb, and then they'd seal it back up, and then you say, hey, you want this statue of Isis? Like, yeah, you take it and whatever, or like they scam it and such. But to me, it doesn't make sense because the area that this is found in is so not touristy. Like it's near a couple things, but like Beni Suef doesn't have like there's not enough things that I could imagine huge tourist groups going. And so I actually think this one in particular might be more for social media. Because I'm really curious if... I'm actually wondering if I should go find that video because I did want to show you guys that. So selling stuff. So yeah, selling stuff on the internet. So let's go to TikTok for a second and let's see if I can find. Give me like 2 seconds. Why do you make me do this every single time, TikTok?
I'm gonna be the bigger person here.
Okay. If I go to Egypt news, oh god, this is gonna take me forever. We're just gonna scroll back to last year. The Collector, I'm curious if you have had any experience with anybody talking about items from Punt, because I've had several people reach out to me about plates that have been excavated in Somalia. Yeah, Star, that's what I'm talking about. I'm trying to see if I can find that video. It's okay, so it's before I went to Egypt, so scroll back down. Come on, I know you can do it. Really? Of course. I'm pretty sure it's in my Egypt news playlist, so let's just scroll back down and see if I can find it. I'm hoping that the page is still up on TikTok because I know it was around the same time as all the Cleopatra stuff. when everyone said that Cleopatra's tomb was found and then it actually wasn't Cleopatra's tomb. Oh, smugglers caught excavating. I forget half of these Egypt news. It always cracks me up because I'm like, I completely forgot that happened. It's here somewhere. I should have prepped this. People ask me why I use so many hashtags. It's like so that I can search for my own videos, to be honest. Because sometimes it's really hard to find my own videos. Especially because I'm just going off of... No, these are recent videos. Also, these are not in the right order. Which is also very annoying. We can try to see if I used... Oh, there's also that. Oh my god, I forgot about that. I should have made a section about that recent news. That was recent news. Okay, that's the most recent. God dang it. I really wish I should have looked this up before because I did want to show you guys the videos if I could find it. Oh, okay, so this is...
They just released a couple more photos about this fake Egyptian tomb in Beni Suef, so I wanted to show you what
this is
like.
The Beni Suef video.
Here it seems to be the kind of entrance hallway of the tomb. They did release a little bit more information, including essentially security forces saw a group of guys in a pickup truck that were able to escape, and that was when they originally found essentially the tomb shaft with a metal grate over it. And the security forces actually thought it was a real tomb until the Ministry of Antiquities sent people over and they were like, okay, no, this is actually a fake tomb.
Which is
really
hysterical.
like the big statue of Taweret. I think it actually looks pretty good. And to be honest,
this
the
is actually a
wall paintings
different...
I can tell are bad, but the hieroglyphs actually are not that bad. I can read some of it.
This must be a different side of the picture.
Osiris's name, which is pretty cool. I will be forever questioning.
I'm gonna look at the hashtag fake tomb, and I feel like I'm gonna find my video on this. Dang it. No, only has that one. I'm just so mad. I wish I could find it. The weird thing is I'm worried it's not in Egypt news because it was a stitch. I stitched it and I was like, guys, this is not a real tomb. And if I could scroll back, all right, I can't find it. If I find it, I'll post it somewhere and stuff. Yeah, I've been getting a lot of things. I genuinely, I'm going to say this. I don't think they actually excavated the things that they're saying they excavated in Somalia. I know that they are doing excavations and stuff, obviously. But there's this very strange thing that I've gotten 4 or 5 different people messaging me about one plate that looks, I'm not even joking, they sent me pictures of it. It is a tourist plate. It is absolutely 100% a really bad metal tourist plate, which you can see in my background. Like, I have a bajillion of this, and all of that. And so it was a really, really bad plate, and they say, oh, it has a map to Punt, and it's just like an amalgamation of a million different things, and it's just not like real. Hi, Lenore. I am not a biblical Egyptologist or archaeologist, so I don't talk about anything that has to do with the Bible unless you want the opinion of an Egyptologist of if any of those things is correct. So if you really want that opinion, I can give it to you, but it is going to be a little harsh, and I will preface with that. Really? Selling smuggled goods. Oh, yes. That is still, yeah, smuggled goods is still going around as well, too. Okay, so the worlds of fake and forgeries is obviously still is harder to essentially to pass by experts, because there are still merchants today that are creating objects that mimic ancient Egyptian pieces. But in comparison, a lot of the souvenirs that you will find while traveling, many of these are technically more authentic, and they are made by modern Egyptians that you will see in other places that you might go and be touristy. Like in places in Europe, your gonna find things that are still made in China. Like when you really look at a lot of the Egyptian pieces, like when it comes to papyrus pieces in Cairo and alabaster pieces, or no, so like papyrus, a lot of oh my god, I can't speak. A lot of merchants still make papyrus in Cairo, and a lot of people still make alabaster pieces in Luxor. Like these are actual genuine objects and genuine tourist souvenirs rather than items that have been made in China and mass produced and such. But also don't be fooled when anyone says that they're genuine, because they're not, and they're just trying to get you to spend more money. So quick thing, Lenore, there is no archaeological evidence that really can support a lot of the things that happens in the Bible when it comes to things in Egypt. I don't know anything about the Near East and such, but when it comes to Egypt, a lot of the things that are mentioned there is no evidence. There is no evidence that there was a large enslaved population in Egypt, let alone a Jewish enslaved population. So there's just not a lot of physical evidence and such, but Egypt's awesome. Egypt's awesome. I don't, all the things that in the Bible are things that got me interested in Egypt, but yeah, a lot of things is not in. Yeah, thank you so much, The Collector. Absolutely. We're also live on Twitch right now, and we do lectures. This is the season 3 premiere of our Beyond Denial lecture series, in which I give a lecture a month and I have a guest give a lecture a month. And we go from March to October every year. And so we do these lectures twice a month. Our next lecture is going to be on the 29th, about alternative paths in archaeology, with Alexandra. I love archaeology with dots in between on TikTok. And on other weekend days, we also do discussion streams where they're more open, they're more chill, rather than like having the full PowerPoint and notes that I've created and stuff. I'm gonna have some gummies really quick. Oh, I kind of want corn nuts. No, Melissa, save your corn nuts. I've eaten so much corn nuts in the past like 2 days. I'm gonna eat some sour gummies. All right. So what we're gonna talk about next is the how do museums deal with fakes, and kind of what the process is, and then we're gonna look into some museums that have ancient Egyptian fakes and what they do. I'm agnostic, so. Oh, Freya, hello. Who is my favorite god? Medjed. Medjed's my favorite god. Nut is my favorite goddess. I also really like Thoth and stuff. There's a lot of amazing Egyptian gods we have. Thank you, Freya. So much. 18 months. Okay. One more gummy for the road. Actually, brief break. I gotta get some water. I don't have any more water in my cup. Maybe I'll get corn nuts. I'll decide. I did get some. Ooh. Okay. Thank you for offering a libation. Those are some good ones, Lenore. There's so many good Egyptian gods. Mom can be annoyed by my crunching, but I'm not going to be able to crunch that much because obviously I have to talk the entire time, so. Just oh, one's gone. On the floor now. Never to be seen again. TikTok. Don't do this to me. There we go. Well, that's a good idea. I could do a video on that. I'm gonna write that down. spell. Egyptian money. I wish I had any coins. I have a couple dollars left over, but I don't have that many left. Yes, I do know. I have not made a video about it because I've been so busy. Yes, they did confirm that the gem, July 3rd, is opening. I'm a little doubtful. I think it'll be fine, but we'll see what happens. Lady Lara Croft, congrats on winning the Battle Royale. Alright. So, where'd my notes go? Okay. Part like the major parts, like part 2 of this whole lecture. So, there are probably hundreds, if not thousands, of fakes and forgeries in ancient Egyptian collections around the world. Honestly, if not more than thousands. Many of these pieces were probably purchased in the early days of the museum or have been donated by individuals who essentially were scammed in Egypt when they visited, and they didn't necessarily know that the pieces were fake when actually donating them. And also that the curators did not catch that they were fakes, which again also implies that they were donated pretty early in like the museum's life, but there are exceptions to this fact, absolutely. So the biggest question then lies in, what do you do with fakes when they have been discovered in your collection? And this is on more of the like the museum studies side, but it is a difficult kind of like random thing that happens, especially for new museum people who are at a museum that's been open for a very, very, very long time. Very, very true collector. I forgot to mention that as well. Though I will talk about lots. The other option is that a museum would have purchased a larger lot that have half genuine or half fakes, or some sort of mixture of the two. We are going to talk about those types as well. Or it's like an estate. An estate has donated everything. They have donated their entire collection to the museum. So, you have a shelf of fakes? Wow, that's very cool, the collector. I would collect fakes. I think that's something that I would do. I am not ethically kind of allowed to collect actual Egyptian artifacts, but I think the ethics would excuse me if I would collect fakes and such. Liam, that is a very good question. So Liam asked, are there any forgeries made by the ancient Egyptians themselves, like faking an older period? There are, but I would not say that is a forgery, because they are essentially just copying. They are, one of the biggest examples of that is in the late period. They do something that we call archaizing art, in which they were inspired by Old Kingdom art, so then they were creating their own art in an Old Kingdom style. I would not necessarily call that a forgery, or a fake, because it is still an ancient Egyptian object. But there are exceptions of that, yes, where that's just a decision, essentially, an art historical decision that we're just deciding that we're gonna do art this way, which is similar to like the Amarna period, is that they are just choosing to depict things differently. Yeah, so it's really hard, actually. You look at some late period stuff and you immediately are like, wait a second, what is this? Because if you knew the date, it wouldn't make any sense. It wouldn't make any sense of it. Sorry, I got a lot of questions coming in. Sorry. Is restoration work considered a fake or forgery? What if it is undocumented restoration, say for a private collection that wasn't part of the piece's documentation? Another great question, Silver. So in some cases, yes, there are some artifacts that were talked about in this book where one piece of the artifact was original, was an actual piece of ancient art, and then the other half, actually I can show you, I won't be able to show you easily, but where somebody essentially has added onto it. And one of the scandals we're going to talk about is a good example of that. I'm looking. Where is it? Hello? Her. I'm making sure that you guys can see this. So this statue has a line that goes along here, and people believe that the bottom half is actually accurate, is actually ancient, and the top half is not. This is a statue of Queen Amos Nefertari. And it's believed that essentially somebody found the bottom half and then recreated the second half. So this technically is the forgery versus fake, but they have kind of restored it and like recreated it. So she had to stop searching. You're so bad, Harasaka. But there are instances where dealers may have touched things up, may have added paint, may have added inscriptions to make them sell better. In some cases, you can call that a fake or a forgery, even if it is on an actual ancient piece and stuff, but it is to like increase the value of that piece and such. Sorry, I'm scrolling back up. Lenore, it's more complicated than that. Ancient Egyptian, so we called something called the pharaonic period. So pharaonic is the pharaoh in that essentially ends with the it ends with the Greeks and then the Romans taking over, and then they rule in Egypt for a really long time, and then the entire area is taken over by Arab conquest. And that is when, it's not that they just change over, it's that they, for hundreds of years, were under Roman rule, and then the entire area was invaded by Arabs, and those are the Islamic people that would have believed in the Quran, which is why there are still Christian Coptics. It's called Coptic, is a specific sect of Christianity that believe in Christianity but live in Egypt. One of the biggest collectors of Egyptian objects has a shelf of amusing forgeries. I love it. I know a little bit about Punt. We don't know everything. I have a pretty concise video of it if you wanted to see more. I don't have as much time because we're doing a lecture in the middle to explain about Punt, but I know a decent amount. Recarved objects, yeah, as well, yeah. Mainly again with inscriptions trying to increase power. Rupert Wace, really? Thank you, the collector. I'll look at it in a sec. All right. Very good questions, everybody. No, Lenore, digging in Egypt is really hard for those who are not in a PhD program, and I have no plans in the future to do a PhD program. It would be a definite dream. I've kind of accepted that I would not be able to. I've done plenty of excavations in other areas, in Europe and in America, but it would be a very random chance if somebody asked me to come on a dig to Egypt. It would be very cool, but I'm not associated with any sort of university or any sort of museum and stuff, so I would pretty much have to go into a PhD program. There are very rare groups. There are very rare groups that will just take people to Egypt because you need a lot of permits and you need a lot of security clearances and stuff. Do you know what % of artifacts found would have been owned by regular Egyptians, not royalty? Not a lot. Less than half by far. Mostly, I think the reason I say like less than half is because a lot of the, like, in the grand scheme of things, so many of the objects that we have would have been owned or would have been for ancient Egyptian pharaohs, but in comparison to how many there would have been if all of these tombs had not been unlooted, like, it would have been like 99%. If all of these tombs were like unlooted, like Tutankhamun's has 5,000 objects inside of it. More than 5,000, 5,300 or something. If you multiply that by however many pharaohs there are, like 99% of all objects from ancient Egypt would have been from royalty. And I feel like because a lot of these tombs are not preserved, we don't have that much and stuff. Yeah, and exactly, like, the pyramids and things from the Old Kingdom have like very little objects and stuff. But I will say the other objects that we have that are from non-royalty are probably at best middle class and up. It is very, very rare to find anything from lower classes, just because they didn't have things, and they didn't have tombs to be able to keep those things. And so if you find a burial of someone in that class, they might not have anything. They probably were not even mummified. It's also the same thing. I've heard these phrases that people have been throwing around that we don't have a lot of mummies. Like, there's just not a lot of mummies. And I'm like, there are a ton of mummies. What are you talking about? And I think what you don't understand is that the reason we don't have a lot of mummies is because only the upper classes were mummified. Like, the vast majority of people are not mummified. So if they're comparing it to the population of Egypt in any sort of time period, yes, we do not have a lot of mummies, but that's only because not a lot of people were mummified. But I know people are going to use it as excuses for like Mummia and Mummy Brown and unwrapping parties and things like that. So there's the other half of it as well. Okay, so museums have a wide range of policies for dealing with forgeries, and in many cases they will remove the artifact from display as it no longer fits with their policy of presenting only authentic artworks. There are also many ethical implications of forgery that are important to consider. Essentially, by stimulating the market of fake antiquities can then increase the demand for real objects, which also encourages looting from archaeological sites and also robbery of museums themselves. When it comes to if you find a forgery, most museums are going to choose to pull the piece from view if it had been in public in the museum. And then they can decide if they would like to deaccession it. So deaccessioning is a tedious and long process. Oh, why did the sound alert not go off? 23 shouts. Thank you for subscribing for 1 month. Nat, I'm so proud of you. I'm so proud of you for finishing your quiz. Very nice look, collector. But yeah, thank you 23 shouts for subscribing. I don't know why the sound alert didn't go off. That was weird. Maybe it'll go off in a second. So deaccessioning objects is very long and tedious, and it does not happen very often. Essentially, curators have to prove to the board of the museum why this piece should not be in the collection. And nowadays there are only a couple, like valid deaccession objects. And it's, for a long time you could kind of do it for any sort of reason, and a lot of times and nowadays it is seen as unethical to do a couple of these options. So you can't just sell a piece to fund the purchase of new pieces or to build or renovate the museum. One of the only ways that you can really deaccession an object is if it is damaged beyond repair, it does not follow the scope of the museum, or in some cases is a fake or a forgery. But there's also sometimes rules in the museum that you are not allowed to deaccession objects because of the rules of the person who donated it. So we have some examples that are a little crazy that I want to talk about. So there is something called the Friedman Collection at the Brooklyn Museum, which is a place that I interned for a year in undergrad, which was a really cool experience. And this collection has 926 pieces. It was donated to the museum in 1932. None of these are Egyptian, but this does include Renaissance paintings, jewelry, furniture, as well as Roman and Qing Dynasty pottery. And I want to talk about it even if it doesn't have Egyptian objects, because this is a difficult process to be able to take pieces out. So essentially, they discovered that about 229 of the 926 objects, literally 24%, are either fakes, replicas, misattributed, so they say that they are for one person, the one artist, and it is actually not true, or they're in such bad condition that they can't exhibit it. Many of these would then qualify for deaccessioning, but that's if there wasn't a rule that the original owner set where the entire collection must stay together unless the executor of the estate signed off. And of course, they didn't discover this until, like the 90s, and all the executors had died. And so the museum didn't know what to do. And what they found out is that probably to save space in their own museum, they were going to have to move all of these pieces to offsite storage, which would have had to cost them around $400,000 because it's in Brooklyn. And it would then have taken about $200,000 to maintain it a year to then hold all of these pieces. This obviously is a very unique situation, but it also has happened at other institutions. Now, the other option is that these fakes or forgeries can be kept in the collection and can even be put on display to educate about fakes and forgeries. Some museums have chosen to display these forgeries along essentially with the transparent process of how scholars detect forgeries, and providing an engaging story to the visitors. So next we're going to talk about some of the museums that talk about their ancient Egyptian fakes and forgeries very openly, kind of in their websites and in their actual museums. All right, sorry, I'm going to go back to... I'm trying to get through like each section and then I'm going to go through all the questions because y'all are chatty tonight and I love it. I'm so glad we're doing this. Yes, Lenore, there are people... there are Kemeticists. Kemeticists are people who worship the ancient Egyptian gods. I have quite a few friends as well as followers who are Kemeticists. And I have 2 lectures on my YouTube from a Kemeticist, Kemetic, sorry, it's not Kemetic. Yeah, Kemetic. And that is different, Lenore, than what you're talking about, but Kemetic is the word for it. And there are 2 lectures on my YouTube, one about what is Kemeticism, and then there's also one about the god Set through the eyes of a Kemeticism. No, I do not think aliens built the pyramids. Moving on. Oh, the M. Payne collection. Yes. I have been looking at the Baron and Payne collection. The collector, if you haven't seen, I do a series called Artifact Insight, which is supposed to be about me talking about specific artifacts I see in a museum, but I haven't been to a museum in so long. So I do... Nowadays, it's been giving the 5 minutes of fame to Egyptian pieces that are selling in auctions, and I've had quite a few, pieces that were from the M. Payne collection. I haven't seen any fakes yet, but they don't depict aliens, LMAP. Nope, I have a whole video on that, LMAP. You can watch it. I did a whole series about the Sphinx and such. They're in my TikTok chat, Nat, if you want to let them out. It's buildings. Oh my god, Harasakawan. Oh my goodness. Alrighty. So the first one we're going to look at is something called the Barnes Foundation. And this is a really great example of Egyptian pieces that cannot be removed because of the owner's rules. And this is a museum outside of Philadelphia that is mainly modern art, but it also has some ancient pieces as well. And essentially, at the Barnes Museum, specifically, they cannot remove any objects from their collection because the objects were carefully positioned in Albert Barnes' ensembles and education displays, making them historical documents that reflect his vision and teaching philosophy. And you can see an image of all of these pieces here. There are quite a few other Egyptians, but you can see this little cow that we're going to talk about sitting right here on the bottom shelf. But everything essentially is meant to stay in its exact same place. Yes, Star, we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about it. Don't worry. So yeah, so this is, LMAP, I'm not going to answer any more questions about the Sphinx, but it's because the Sphinx is a natural stone that is naturally eroded, and then they built on top of it and carved out of it. It's called a, what's the word? I always forget the word for it. Yardang. It's called a yardang. Very cool, Lenore. Okay, where was I? So Barnes's intent on his entire intent for acquiring antiquities was essentially to allow visitors and students to find collections in the techniques and the arts, using color, line, lighting, and space, that artists use to express themselves both across time and different cultural traditions. So he specifically gathered a lot of these pieces from a very wide time period to kind of show how art has changed over time. And so part of these rules is that these pieces cannot be deaccessioned because they are all part of that teaching methodology. And so it appears that his name was Albert C. Barnes. It appears that when he was buying Egyptian objects for his collection in the 19th and early 20th century, he was able to spot fakes in contemporary art, but not in ancient art, because he actually purchased several forgeries that are only now being identified. And we're only going to talk about this one here, which is a small blue glass cow statuette. You have this little squat little cow, and you have this kneeling figure that is suckling from the udders of this cow. And in this case, the cow is most likely going to be the goddess Hathor, and then the person suckling could be the pharaoh. It's usually pharaoh because they usually are doing some sort of suckling scene because they are gathering essentially the milk or the raw power of the goddess and such. Okay. So, Barnes bought the statuette from a Paris dealer in December 1923 as part of a larger purchase of Egyptian and Greek objects. It was labeled as a sacred cow, dating to, surprisingly, the website says 2000 BC, even though that label says 4000 BC. And he purchased the whole lot for 3,000 francs. There essentially was no other information about its provenance or the purchase or its ownership history that may have helped trace where this piece to its original archaeological context, and therefore confirm its authenticity. They took this object into the conservation lab, and they noted several oddities that made them doubt its authenticity, and this is very, very recently in comparison. Essentially, the glass making and glass working were relatively new technologies for ancient Egypt, developed during the New Kingdom period, and they only really produced small luxury sorry, this is why I can't eat corn nuts when I'm talking. God, the little pieces are like shards in my throat. Okay. The airboats. Oh my god. Lena, I will answer your question. Well, let me read it. No. I'm not familiar with that one, Lena. Is it like the stone soldiers? I can't remember what they're called. We talked about it. I know what they are. I just can't remember what the king's name is. Yeah, the terracotta warriors. Yeah. Okay. 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 I'm lost. I'm lost in my notes. Thank you for the follow. Okay, yeah. So glassworking was relatively new. They only really produced small decorative objects such as inlays, beads, earrings, amulets, and some like perfume vessels. And Egyptian glasswork is characterized by the opaque use of blue, greens, reds, yellows, blacks, and whites colors. The piece also exhibits sign of modern glass working techniques, and you can't see it from this image, but there is a mold line that goes along the top of the cow. You can sort of see a little bit of it right here. and essentially indicates that the cow was created from two halves that were then combined using a two-part mold, which ancient Egyptians did not do. They actually mainly used open-faced terracotta molds. They rarely did the two-part molds. And then when they essentially zoomed in with a microscope, they found out that this glass has this scale-like pattern, and essentially these crystalline structures are formed through the rapid cooling against the surface of the mold. So this is, they didn't have a lot of glass. Like glass, they sort of started in like the New Kingdom, but like when you really, really look at glass, there's not really until like the Greeks come in. It's because they couldn't get the fire hot enough, really. They were able to use like glazes, and faience is technically like a semi-glass material. It's a silica, but glass, like glass blowing, nothing like that. They never really got to that point. So in also addition, the cow's not really in proportion to this time period it's coming from, and so the theory is that the forger who made it looked at reliefs of cows from Deir al-Bahri, which is Hatshepsut's mortuary temple, and those images were becoming very popular in the early 19th and 20th century through the production of plaster cast, photographs, and painted reproductions. And so looking at these pieces, you can tell that it is definitely a mock-up of those, but it is in this kind of unique glass imagery. The researchers who went into this, they also discovered that they found a very similar object that circled around private collections since the 19th century that is both blue and yellow, and it suggests that both of these pieces are 19th century forgeries and probably could have been used with the exact same mold. All right. So the next thing we're going to look at is the Delaware Museum. The University of Delaware has a small little art museum, and they actually have apparently quite a few forgeries. And so I found a webpage where they apparently did essentially an exhibition on forgeries, and quite a few of these are Egyptian. And so some of the forgeries are as follows. So I think the funerary boat model is one of my favorites, because when I did look at it, I was like, this doesn't look that fake. And then I was looking at it closer and I was like, oh, okay, I think I'm getting what's happening here. So these models of boats were typically produced in the first intermediate to middle kingdom periods, essentially showing the deceased person on a boat that was then taken through the afterlife. And so usually there would be a deceased figure sitting on the back as all these men are rowing or sailing with sails down the Nile River. And so what essentially they just discovered is that this is probably actually produced in Egypt, and it was a much, much more recent forgery than some of the other ones that you've seen. Bye, Nat. We'll see you soon. And it turns out that this model is sculpted out of the wood from the Asvelia species, which is native to tropical parts of Africa and parts of Asia. The boat is painted with a mixture of calcium carbonate iron oxide, and then iron oxide red, and carbon black, all of which were used in Egypt. And I'm like, okay, these are looking pretty good. And then in 1984, there was a radiocarbon dating of the wood sample in the boat, and at most, it is only 150 years old. Now, the other thing is these figures that are sitting on top. Ooh, sorry. Unfortunately, they could not be tested, as essentially a radiocarbon test would have fully destroyed the wood, because it would need to be as long as like one of these guys' arms, essentially. And what they found out is that these figures stylistically are very inconsistent, and they don't really all match together, because some of them are in a rowing position while others are in the position of raising a sail. You can see these guys have their arms up, these guys have their hands down. And what is the theory is that this is actually, one, a sign that the forger has no idea what they're doing, but there's a possibility that the figures are really genuine, and they are taken from multiple different boat scenes, and that the boat itself was made, which I think is 100% like true. Because the proportions of all these guys are completely different. Like, these three look like that they could be from the same piece. This piece looks different. These guys, all three look different. And the boat itself is so bad in comparison. But I think it's really interesting because it is a way of, again, using something that is authentic and combining it together to essentially scam or make a forgery. Yes, the collector. We mentioned that there was a artist in Gurna who would take wood from coffins and carve them and put them in semi-liquid plaster and paint them to look like actual pieces as well. But yeah, so this is kind of an amalgamation of different pieces, some being real and some being fake. Sorry, I'm reading your thing, Lena. Oh, really, Lena? This is actually becoming more familiar when you said that. Lena is talking about an agreement between a Western museum and a Chinese museum about an exchange of exhibits, and that the Chinese museum was going to provide some terracotta soldiers, and it turns out they were not actually taken from the tomb, but modern replicas. Yeah, absolutely. So anything that we're going to consider fakes or forgeries is going to be anything made after, for the most part, made after the pharaohs ruled. So yes, we did at the very beginning of this lecture talk about the Phoenicians made objects using Egyptian motifs, as well as the Greeks and the Romans did like these combination. They had a cult of Isis, and so they had imagery of Isis, but it was in this kind of not Egyptian way. And those I don't technically consider fakes or forgeries because they are authentic pieces from that time, but they are taking essentially Egyptian ideals and Egyptian art forms. But the vast majority of these are being made in the late 17, 18, and 1900s, if not 2000s. We talked about a tomb that was just a fake tomb that was discovered in 2023. So most of these are fakes that were sold either to try to scam actual experts, which we're going to talk about in a second, or most likely to be sold to tourists. Genuinely to be sold to tourists as genuine pieces, not as souvenirs, because there are also people making souvenirs as well. Yeah, and so in this case, it's like, it is a forgery in the sense that you are taking some real things and you are changing how it was. No problem, Kuro. The street, we still have quite a few stuff to go on. And then all of these lectures I'm going to be posting on my YouTube, but you'll be able to watch this on Twitch, obviously, for like the next 2 weeks and stuff. This one is very hard. I would be duped by this one. It's only a little bit in the face that makes it look weird. This one, again, when I saw these figurines, I thought they were legit, but this boat is so sad. I'll show you guys some, and I'm gonna use you guys like a test to see if you guys can figure out some of the ones that we're gonna talk about. Oh, interesting, Lena. Interesting. I'm getting what you're putting down. We talked about this a little bit, is that there are a lot of the souvenirs that you will buy in Egypt are produced in Egypt by local artisans, like papyrus pieces and what was the other one? Alabaster. A lot of alabaster is carved. Like, it is technically a tourist trap, but you can go to these alabaster factories where they are creating souvenirs. And so, like, it's not that they are creating fakes, they are creating souvenirs, but they also are considering them, like, they are more real and such. Yeah. Oh, interesting. Hey, you dude. Welcome on in. It's interesting. So LMAP, we've kind of discussed this already. If it's actually made during ancient Egyptian times, I'm not going to consider it a fake or a forgery. I'm going to consider it, they are copying another style from another time period in ancient Egypt. I'm not really going to consider it a fake or forgery, because fake and forgery, what the connotation of that is that they are being sold as genuine. And that's not what ancient Egyptians would do. Like, everything in that time period is genuine because they've made it then. It's like, it's hard to kind of wrap your head around it, but like a fake or a forgery is something that is being explicitly told to somebody that it is real. And they're conning you. It is a con, it is a scam. And technically anything that is made in ancient Egypt is not a con or a scam because it is made in that time period. And again, they aren't, ancient Egyptians themselves are not seeing antiquities as old. Like, it's not the same thing and stuff. But yeah, that's very interesting, Lena. It's very, very interesting. It's a interesting way to think about it, is that they've used the same practices, so it shouldn't be inauthentic, but it's, yeah. They are just as real as the one from the Emperor's Tomb, which is so... It's so wrong in a, obviously, museum sense, but I completely understand why they think that. It's very interesting. Alrighty, sorry. Sorry. There's some water. Yeah, so... when it comes to this little boat, I'm definitely saying that these are genuine, but this boat is the forgery, that they are essentially trying to put it all together. Probably somebody just had these little figurines and didn't think that they would sell well, so you put them all together and put them on the boat and stuff. You also have this Shabti figure. So Shabtis are typically sculpted out of a hard stone, but this one is sculpted out of a soft soapstone. And while I think it really does look authentic, the inscription here is what really indicates that it's a forgery, although to my naked eye, it looks very good. But essentially, this appears to have been copied from something very, very random, and it doesn't say what it's supposed to say, which is supposed to be a specific Book of the Dead that is mentioned on all Shabtis, and this just appears to be gibberish. Though I will say, it looks really good, but if I actually try to translate it, it would not work out well. I have not been to it since the galleries have opened, but I did go last year when the grand staircase and the lobby was opened, when I was in Egypt last year. Have we ever found forgeries found in tombs left by ancient tomb raiders to hide the fact they looted it? Very good question. I do not believe so. I can't think of anything that specific, but often you do find... It's kind of weird. So you sometimes in tombs that have been looted, you will find quote-unquote trash from the time period that it was looted, which like at first will give you a weird date when you're dating the tomb itself, but then you find out, oh no, it's something that the looters left. But nothing on purpose, like a forgery that has been left there. I would not say that. Like certain things, like in Tutankhamun's tomb. Thank you for the follow, AU dude. Like a Snickers wrapper. Yes and no. There's a piece of Tutankhamun's tomb that was found in the stairwell, in the stairs, that was probably taken by the looter and then dropped outside of it and stuff. Okay, so this is the last thing from the University of Delaware's museum that was Egyptian, that was a fake. It's both a scarab seal, but also has a sphinx carved on top, which is not a thing. It does not exist. This is not a... Like, it's so obvious to me that this is a forgery. This is a weird type of thing. I will say, they do have... The cartouches are accurate. They do have a accurate rendering of the cartouche of Ramses II. You can see... This one says, yeah, Ra Mes, Ra Mes Ooh. No, that's not how you say it. Nah, one of these is his name. I can't remember. Yeah, it's a sphinx rib. It's a sphinx rib. We don't know, but we can assume at least, again, 1800s and on. I would say because of because of the hieroglyphs actually being accurate, I would say closer to 1900s, just because hieroglyphs weren't translated until mid 1800s. But yeah, so like there's just all these random symbols on the other side, and obviously like having the head of a, which this isn't even the head of a, like it's not a sphinx because the rest of the thing is a scarab. It's just a head attached to a scarab, which is weird. And so again, like he's probably copying this, like this is probably he copied an actual piece that was accurate, and then like this he just went with it and stuff. Yes, it was definitely easier to get away with fakes in the 1800s. There are some exceptions that we're going to talk about that are a little bit later, but you're right, yeah, in the 1800s it was much easier to get fakes through. A lot of these fakes that we're going to talk about, the museums didn't really discover them until very recently. The Kelsey Museum of Archaeology at the University of Michigan has quite a few Egyptian fakes, and they have a whole website that is dedicated to these fakes, and we're going to quickly go through a couple of them. And so the first one we have here is this girl here in a swimming posture. It's supposed to be a cosmetic grinder, purported to be from the 18th dynasty, and was purchased by a private collector from a reputable auction house in 1956. And then when the item was studied in the 1990s, there was a lot of discrepancy. The wood is really light in weight, which suggests it might be ancient wood. However, it is like this coarse-grained utilitarian wood, which is where you would not use this wood for this deluxe items. And there are several items that look like this. This swimmer motif on these like cosmetic spoons is very, very common. Yeah, Elma, there are some that people have purported. There's one of the things we're going to talk about in a second. There are still people to this day that say they are all real, and they're not. One of the big things, I didn't have time to do enough research about it, is that there is some people that say that the Meidum geese are fake, which is a really big deal if that is true. But I couldn't really find enough information to include it in this, and so that might have to be, I might have to do a little bit more deep diving, because unfortunately it's only a recent thing, so it wasn't in this book that I was reading. It's called the Meidum geese. It's from the tomb of Neferma'at and Atet. Meidum, M-E-I-D-U-M. It's an area in Egypt. Geese, like literally geese. And it's a painted relief that is in the Cairo Museum, and it's in really, really good condition. And I didn't have time to look into it. I have a feeling it's not that people are saying it's fake, it's that people say that it was added to, that it was restored, like heavily, because it was discovered really early. But that was something that kept popping up, and I was like, I just couldn't find enough information to include it in this. But it's a very, very famous piece. So yeah, the proportions of the spoon are not really stylized, and what is very interesting is that her face is very much modeled off the Amarna period. Yes, it's a painted relief from a tomb of these like 4 or 5 geese that are in its really good shape. And I will say, you guys will notice there will be a pattern. Amarna period items are very commonly mentioned in forgeries. They are really often popping up, and we're going to talk about 2 really big scandals about Amarna period pieces. You also have these papyrus rolls over here. And this is a very interesting thing that is like, it is not technically a forgery, but it is a weird repackaging of antiquities. And so these are genuine pieces of papyrus that are now rolled up with strips of ancient cloth from probably mummies, and then they have these little seals placed on them. But they are not, that's not how these pieces would have been preserved. And we know this because you can actually see they rolled the papyri with the hieroglyphs on the outside, which is not how they would have been rolled, and this is just not how they would have been packaged. And so some dealer thought it would be more interesting to kind of essentially market them as unsealed, untouched pieces. Yeah, this is. I have been dying to go here for a while. My field school was run by University of Michigan, and so I've been dying to go here for quite a long time. But I don't have an excuse to just like go to Michigan just to see a museum. But maybe one day I will. These canopic jars down here are also fakes. They were donated to the museum in 1973. The theory originally was that the actual jars were not fake, but the inscriptions that were carved into were essentially added by a dealer to, again, probably increase the market value. And then further investigation went into it, and they do indeed they are probably all fakes. I will say the human one looks okay, and the proportions look much better. These three ones look awful, especially this jackal one. This jackal one looks so weird. It's very funny. How odd it looks to me. Some locations or tombs we know about that we've never excavated. No. Like there are cities that we know of that, yeah, maybe haven't gotten a lot of excavation. Tombs is harder. There are a lot of tombs that were excavated once and are now sealed, and you could go back and excavate it again, but yeah, it's not that we're like purposely not going into tombs that we already know. Granted, you can't just go into a tomb and choose to excavate it. There's a permit process. You have to have like actual reputation and archaeologists to be able to do it and stuff. Oh, actually, I give you one example. There is one example of this, and that is the what pyramid is that? It's not a pyramid. It's was going to be a pyramid at one point, but was never finished. Is it the South Meguzna pyramid? It's a really weird one. It's essentially on a, it was partially excavated like a long time ago, like in the early 1800s. And then they chose that site for a military base. So the entire site is blocked off. So it can never be excavated unless essentially the military says so. Yeah, that's the only one that I can specifically think of that it's like, we know about it, it's there, we should be able, I wish we could go excavate it, but now it is on the property. Okay, no. Unfinished Northern Pyramid of Zawat el Aran. It was fully excavated? Oh, I didn't think it was fully excavated. But, okay, so it was fully excavated. It's just nowadays nobody would be able to further excavate it. And you can always re-excavate stuff. It's just, it's not always the best. Yeah, I feel like there are areas in other countries where there are sites that we know about that we're not allowed to excavate. Like in China, there's the big pyramid. Where you're not allowed to excavate it because they think that there's a giant mercury pool inside the middle of the thing, and so they're like, if we open this up, I don't know what's gonna happen, and so they decided not to. Yeah, no, not the bent pyramid. No, there are so many pyramids that don't look like pyramids now. No, it's called the Unfinished Northern Pyramid of Zawat el Aran. Yeah, there are pharaohs that we know that we've never found a tomb, but we've never found a tomb. So yes, there are potentially tombs that are out there for those pharaohs, but it's not like we know about them and we haven't excavated them. It's just we don't know where they are. Yeah. So yeah, there are absolutely tombs that of pharaohs that we don't know where they are. One of the ones we're actually going to talk about, one of the queens, we don't know where her tomb is. I know. It's going. Yeah, absolutely. So many hidden secrets. Finishing up this. So this statue is so fake. It's so bad. Sorry, I just look at it and I'm like, oh, you look so sad, son. This head of a king was donated in 1925. A visiting curator actually was able to recognize this as a work of a particular forger who has created a lot of fakes. And remember, forgers are just artists. And so she was actually able to notice certain things that this forger did with another statue that she had investigated. And she thinks this piece may have been created in the 1920s. The last three from the museum are three forged Fayum mummy portraits, and it's so sad. It's just so obvious. And I will say, there are some very sad looking Fayum mummy portraits. I will admit that. I'm not going to say that there aren't. But these ones, it's just, they're so dead inside. There's something about the, like, it's just so obvious to me that they are just, like, not real ones. And yeah, there's something very flat about it. Like, there's not a lot of detail. One of the things is that these pieces, these Fayum mummy portraits would have originally had a layer of gesso, which is like a white kind of like base paint. And then they would have had the paint, and they also may have used encaustic, which is like beeswax kind of material as well. And so these ones, I think that is like the big thing that they are lacking, is that like the eye shape. There's a lot of things. I will say they absolutely look like they're made by the same person though. There's something about it. But yeah, it's very, very, very similar and stuff. Sorry, I missed your question. No. We do still have the lecture questions channel point up and such if you want to use that. Oh, absolutely no. Yeah, absolutely. Hobby Lobby there are some Egyptian items, but most of the ones from Hobby Lobby are not from Egypt. There are some, but the vast majority of the Hobby Lobby ones were actually stolen. And actually the Hobby Lobby ones were actually stolen from a museum as well. They weren't excavated, but yes, if you want to look up the golden mummy at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. That's the main really good example that happened really recently. This was when I was in grad school, and it was crazy because our teacher she's an Egyptologist, but she specifically specializes in like Greco-Roman period Egypt. And she showed us this coffin, I think before winter break. And she was like, what do you guys think about this? This is a piece that is the Met just purchased. It's just putting on display. Like, what do you think about this? And we all looked at it and we were like, wow, it's a beautiful piece. It's entirely gilded in gold. It's literally gorgeous. And one of my cohorts was like, why have we never seen this piece before? And our teacher was like, exactly. And I don't know if she had heard rumors or something, or if there was already things like circulating around or whatever. It was just crazy. And when we came back from whatever break it was, if it was winter or spring break or something, when we came back, she pulled up the thing that essentially it had broken, that this piece had been illegally excavated in 2011 during the Arab Spring, and was illegally smuggled out of Egypt, tossed around in essentially a antiquities dealership, and then sold to the Met for like millions of dollars. And then they spent millions more dollars to put it up for auction, or to put up an exhibition. And it's all the big one with there's a picture of Kim Kardashian next to it at the Met Gala, and she supposedly broke the situation. No, she did not. But now I actually got to see it. It's actually back in Egypt, and it's at the Egyptian Museum of Civilization. No, the National Museum of Egyptian Civilization. Yeah. There are quite a few museums that do exhibit forgeries on purpose. And these Fayum mummy portraits are portraits of the person who is mummified, and this portrait would have sat inside, like on top of the mummified person, and it would have been like woven in with the wrappings. But a common practice was that early, I'm not even going to use the word archaeologists, early explorers would rip these portraits off the mummy, and they would completely separate them and throw away the mummy typically. And so a lot of the ones you will see are not with the mummy, and so that's why these pieces are just like on this little slab of wood essentially. But they're supposed to depict There's theories if they are supposed to depict the person when they passed away or when they were like in their prime, like a more idealistic version. And I think it's very much like half and half. Okay. Yes, absolutely. If you ever find arrowheads, please do not pick them up. Absolutely not. Don't do it. The last thing is that when I was searching through the British Museum's collection, you can type in like the word forgery and it will pick up anything that is listed as a forgery. And so I'll just note, when it comes to Egyptian objects, 81 results were found to be Egyptian forgeries. 14 were amulets, pendants, or jewelry. 4 were canopic jars. 24 were scarabs, and the rest were statuettes or figurines. Only some of these were fully proved to be forgeries, and many of these didn't even have any photos. But you can look up on like their database, you can put in the word forgery, and you would be able to find pieces that are still in their collection but are considered forgeries. Hold on, add a magazine from all right. So we're gonna do this quick little activity, which I just realized I forgot to bring up the the website. But before we start talking about the scandals, I want to show you kind of the steps on how to spot a fake. And I found this really great website that is kind of dissecting the like how fakes kind of go. And I thought it was really like interesting to kind of talk about. And so we're going to go through this and look at this object and kind of how you spot a fake. This is a piece that is at the, what's it called? Museum. It's the one museum I can never say. It's in the Netherlands. It's the Rijksmuseum, an Egyptian piece. So, a real fake, this relief, but it is not a bad bargain. Forgeries give us a glimpse into the mind of the deceiver, and that is worth a lot. So face off. This relief reminds us of large images on the walls of the monumental graves of wealthy Egyptians. The details on the relief suggest we are dealing with part of an image from an 18th or 19th dynasty, 1549 to 1190 BCE. If you look closely, however, it turns out the relief is not actually from ancient Egypt, but a modern forgery. Yes, alas, this relief is in the collection of the, again, Rijksmuseum van Heden. Rijksmuseum? Thank you. Rijksmuseum. I've always wondered how to pronounce that. Rijksmuseum. So the National Museum of Antiquities, and is indeed a fake. And is clearly visible here. The measurements of the body and shape give away, body and the shape of the face give away the hand of the forger. Ancient Egyptian artists designed their depictions based on a grid, so that a certain points on a figure could be arranged along one single line. That is not the case in this forged relief. For example, the line on the left shoulder, as you guys can see, is much higher than that on the right shoulder, while in true Egyptian art they are supposed to be in one line straight across. The line on the right shoulder touches the neck at a low point, making the neck way too long. Or take the eyes, for example. Ooh, it's like a super high quality. The contour of the eye is too narrow. The inner corner of the eye is not narrow enough. From the outer corner of the eye runs a line, subtly raised relief depicting the eye makeup. The ancient Egyptians applied cosmetic lines like that to protect and adorn their eyes. In old Egyptian art, eyebrows and the cosmetic lines are about the same length. See the eyebrow? Here the line is much shorter than the eyebrow. In the following steps, you can see how, apart from the measurement of the face, there are a couple of things off about the materiality of the piece. The relief fragment is rectangular with a maximum width of 29.5 centimeters. That's not a coincidence. It forms a frame that is the exact fit of the head and shoulders of the figures. Modern art collectors love that, a nice portrait that is easily displayable size. That is not exactly proof of the non-authenticity in of itself, since any art collector could, in theory, carve a true ancient Egyptian relief into a nice rectangle, but the shape seems fitting for the choices a lot of forgers had to make. It's one of the many clues a forger unwillingly left for us, just like his choice of stone. There's more on that in the next step, but for that we'll have to turn over the relief. So you can see the back here. Yes, Raven, that is one of the theories about the... Sorry, I missed that. Oh, somebody subscribed on Patreon. Thank you. You guys are lovely. Absolutely lovely. I have to write the newsletter tomorrow. Thank you so much. If the person who did that is in here. Okay. So the piece is carved out of limestone, but not the lighter quality limestone from the ancient Egyptian graves. This stone is grayish. It was probably treated in the 20th century, perhaps by the forger, to prevent any further flaking or spalling on the surface. How exactly the stone was treated is yet to be researched, but in the next step you can see that at any rate there's no sign of old traces of chiseling. I just got a notification that somebody subscribed to the Patreon, which is just like absolutely lovely. But I gotta do the newsletter. I'm already a day late. It's supposed to come out today. I'm gonna do it while I'm at the conference. So the diagonal chiseling traces that often remained around the carved out figure of ancient Egyptian reliefs cannot be found here. As you can see how the figure was carved on an unusually high relief, there are no other things pictured around the figure. It's especially striking that there is no sign of hieroglyphs, as you would expect in an authentic relief of this fragment. They were most likely left out because of the forger's lack of knowledge of ancient Egyptian language. The missing hieroglyphs are typical for forged art Egyptian pieces. Forgers also tend to mess up the smaller details, proven by the necklace discussed in the next step. So you look at the necklace. Around the man's neck, we see a shebiu necklace, consisting of 2 rows of lens-shaped beads. Necklaces such as these were worn in the Egyptian New Kingdom by kings and high-ranking officers as a symbol for their high social status. Real specimens that have been recovered had beads made of gold and faience. They were made in royal workshops and gifted to high-ranking officers out of appreciation for their services. The beads in the necklace on the relief are too small, and their shapes are too irregular. The modern sculptor messed up by making the bottom row of beads smaller than the beads on the top. The necklace is only visible at the left side of the body and then disappears at the right. In some authentic ancient Egyptian reliefs, the wig covers part of the necklace, but even then the necklace is both visible at both ends of the wig. In this modern relief, the wig is not long enough to cover the necklace. Or part of the necklace, but even then the necklace is visible on both ends of the wig. In this modern relief, the wig is... Oh my god, sorry, I'm not reading. The wig is not long enough to cover the necklace, yet the necklace stops. The forger also rushed the last beads in the bottom row so that the beads touching the wigs are way too small. You can see it here. So, like, this is, like, you getting into it, guys. Like, this is why art historians are art historians, and why antiquities dealers need to be really, really skilled in all of this. A curious wig. The relief depicts a man with a wig consisting of 2 different layers. In the New Kingdom, men wore wigs like these on top of their real hair or on a shaved head. In ancient Egyptian tombs, we found several examples of such wigs. If you guys have never seen this, this is a wig made out of human hair with these curls on the top and the braids on the bottom, which is like the most outrageous wig you've ever seen in your life, and god, it's so ugly. I just like cannot imagine anything like this. But if you've never seen this, it's a crazy one. So the layer partially covers covering that consists of curly or wavy hair. In surviving examples, the top part is often shrunk, uncovering a bigger part of the bottom layer. They do, man. It's a weird type of mullet. It's not my type of mullet. Not any type of mullet. The forger paid a lot of attention to the different locks and curls, but apparently didn't study the other parts of the wig closely enough. On the forehead, the angle of the wig is too steep, causing the contour of the top of the head to become too rounded. You can even see, like, they've messed up here when you're looking at it, this zoomed in. The authentic Egyptian reliefs, the front of the wig is much higher, And the wig in the forged relief isn't wide enough either. The ancient Egyptian art, the wig covered a big part of the shoulder. In the front of the ear, we see a sideburn. That's supposed to depict the real hair of the man peeking out from under the wig. While this is a detail that sometimes occurs in finely executed Egyptian reliefs, the sideburn is too narrow and too short. Next step, only half of an ear. This is not a good ear. The man's ear partially covered by the wig, showing only the bottom half. Here the forger does something that the ancient Egyptians did do in three-dimensional sculptures, but never in reliefs. So take this sculpture. The ancient Egyptian sculptors never completed this sculpture, so there are details missing. The unfinished sculpture does clearly show, however, that Horemheb wears a shabuti necklace and has a wig with 2 layers, just like the... Although, wait, is that this? Oh yeah, this image. Ah! It got translated wrong. It got translated to touch. Sorry. Okay. Just like the man in our relief, in the sculpture, the bottom half of the ears peek out from under the wig, but according to the rules of ancient Egyptian art, a technique like that could not occur in 2-dimensional images. For those, his ear would have to be either completely covered by the wig or completely visible. So how did this end up in the Dutch National Convention? A bankrupted baron. Did the Rijksmuseum allow itself to be misled by a forger? In short, the answer to that is not entirely, because the museum bought the objects as part of a bigger collection of dozens of authentic Egyptian artifacts. The collector, Friedrich W. von Bissing, oh, I've heard of von Bissing. I know, man, this is like, I will say, this is like truly my worst nightmare of like art. Like I did one ceramics class like for the last year I had, and literally it was like so painful because he's just like, I made like this beautiful tree stump and I did rings like how old I was, and he was just like, it's so obvious. And I'm like, I am doing this ceramics class to learn how ancient Egyptians made ceramics, not to be judged by you. Please no. Please no. So von Bissing came from a noble German family. He studied Egyptology in Berlin and spent several years in Egypt. There he financed digs in Abu Ghurab and carried out Egyptological research. He also started acquiring antiques in Egypt. During this period, Egyptology and archaeology were Western, male-dominated fields. The market for archaeological finds in Egypt flourished in the 19th and first half of the 20th century, and through this trade, he was able to create a large collection of ancient Egyptian objects, and it's possible he bought the forged relief from a trader in Cairo. After Germany lost the war, the country was forced to pay sanctions, leading to an economic crisis, and he was working as a professor of ancient Egyptian art at the University of Munich and as a professor of ancient Egyptian and Near Eastern art history at the University of Utrecht. Next. The crisis hit him as well, and he was forced to resign from his position at Utrecht after a scandal. Oh my goodness. Because of his financial issues, he then saw himself forced to auction off and sell his Egyptian objects in multiple installments. In 1939, the Rijksmuseum bought one of these parts of the collection, including the fake relief. We don't have to think of this piece solely as a bad bargain. This forged relief is one of many inauthentic ancient Egyptian artworks that circulate in the art market today and end up in museum collections. But by studying these unmasked forgeries closely, we can learn a lot about the materials, techniques, and historical limitations of the forger. This knowledge helps experts to understand the forgeries better, and that in turn is of great importance for our understanding of what true ancient Egyptian art is, since forgeries end up skewing our views a lot. This forged relief at the Rijksmuseum then remains an object very much worthy of research, and for that reason it will stay put in the museum's collection. So yeah, I thought that was a really great way to kind of really show you guys how step by step you have to be for finding these forgeries, because truly at a very naked eye this looks like a very good piece. This is a very good forgery. And so I thought I really loved how they did this step-by-step process to kind of look through it. So let's get back. Let's get to the scandals, guys. This is the best part. This is what I've been waiting to tell you guys about. So we're going to go through how many? Like 1, 2, like 3 major ones and then like 2 or 3 smaller ones. Which I've been dying to tell you. This is why I wanted to do these, why I wanted to do this entire lecture. So, one of the most famous fakes is going to be a statue of Queen Teddy Sherry, which I'll show you in the next slide. And in general, we do not know much about this queen. She lived in a very interesting time period in ancient Egyptian history during the 17th dynasty, which is in the mid-16th century BCE. And this was a time in the Second Intermediate Period when Egypt was divided between the Hyksos people ruling in the north and the Theban kings ruling in the south. She was both the mother and grandmother of 2 different kings who fought the people of the north and eventually began the 18th dynasty and the New Kingdom. And she was so revived that her own grandson built her a funerary monument in Abydos. And this is one of the only genuine images we have of her. Right here in the center. And this is the fake. So, this is one, again, besides the stela that I showed you, this was one of the only images that we had of her that was like literally preserved. And so for a long, long time, it was an extremely, extremely famous piece before being proven to be a fake. So I'm gonna take a drink. Ooh. God. Too much talking. Yeah, the poor little eye. The wig's the worst part of this one in particular. So E.A. Wallace Budge, the curator of the British Museum, discovered this statue in Luxor in 1890 at the antiquities dealer of Mohammed Mo Asayib. This dealer claimed that it had come from the Queen's funerary chapel, where it was formed a pair with another statue that was in a poorer condition. The dealer was not wrong. There is another statuette with the upper portion damaged. It appears probably only the bottom portion is preserved. You do not understand how I was scouring the internet trying to find a picture of that piece. I think it is in the Cairo Museum. But honestly, I was not really sure because it was acquired by a French archaeological mission in Cairo. And so I'm not really sure where the actual piece is, and I can't find a picture of it. That is a very good point. So yes, we have discussed forgers are still artists. And so the weird thing about this, I always compare it to this book I had to read in French class in high school that was called La Joconde. It's called La Joconde, which is the French name for the Mona Lisa. And it was about the Mona Lisa going missing. And essentially what it turned out to be is that a artist who really loved the Mona Lisa created a fake Mona Lisa, broke into the Louvre, replaced the genuine Mona Lisa with his Mona Lisa, so much so that normal people did not notice, but like oh no, Baha, this is a fake story, but yes, there is an actual story of a guy who stole the Mona Lisa. But no, I'm actually talking about a fictional story that was like a children's book that we read in French class. And so this guy steals the Mona Lisa, and sorry, I did not preface that this is a fictional story because there are thefts of the Mona Lisa, but this is a fictional story. He puts up the fake, and then he puts like plastic wrap over the original and paints on top of the original Mona Lisa, and he hides it in the Louvre in like a storage room so you don't realize it's the Mona Lisa. And after we finished reading this book, we asked our teacher, like, well, what happened to the guy? Like, he stole the Mona Lisa. And she said, no, he doesn't go to jail. And I'm like, what do you mean he doesn't go to jail? And she was like, it never left the Louvre. And that was like, she was very insistent upon like, he did not get arrested because the piece never left the Louvre. He just hid it. And it was all about how he was so proud that his copy was so good that people would not know the difference between the two of them, which is the funny part about this, is that it's very similar to a lot of things we're talking about with forgeries and stuff. So yeah, the hairstyle is what makes this very obvious to me that it is a fake. If everything had been cut off from here, I would have told you it was probably a genuine piece, but the hairstyle is where it gets really wrong. So yeah, so this was supposed to be from her actual funerary chapel that her son created for her. And the piece was purchased in a batch of 19 pieces, some of which were very rare, and mainly the pieces were actually genuine. Wallace Budge purchased all these pieces for a total sum of 490 British pounds. And to be honest, Budge did have a keen eye of an expert, as he had been the curator for over 14 years, and he had taken part in many different digs. And so, yes, we are talking about Budge. We hate Budge, but he's not doing anything with language right now, so we don't have to hate him that much. So this is his slip up, though. I will admit, this is his slip up, is that he should have had a keen eye for this, but what I don't blame him necessarily for is kind of two things. One, the rarity of any images of Teddy Sherry. Again, before this, we had one unfinished statue that did not include a face or a body of Teddy Sherry. So you can't blame him for not knowing what she might look like or what she has been depicted as. And then the other point is that she comes from a second intermediate period, which is when art was not necessarily as standardized as you see in like the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, and the New Kingdom. Because she is coming from this intermediate period, artists were not funded by the pharaoh. There was not a lot of power in the pharaoh. And so art is particularly bad, with big quotation marks, but bad. It does not fall into the standards of other typical ancient Egyptian art. So it is not unlikely that why this piece looks a little weird. Yeah, no, I meant literally statues of her. There are no like statues of her that you could compare it to. Some other pictures so you can see the back of her head. So the statuette was immediately very popular, and it was on display at the British Museum for many, many, many years. It was not until 1984. Is that literally like 100 years later? When did he buy this? Yeah, it's like 90 years later. 90 years later, an Egyptologist... I know, it's like the worst haircut you could have ever gotten. Pretty much. It's so bad in the back. It's just like, it cracks me up how bad it is. And she's getting very Amarna elongated head vibes, which is also strange. So in 1984, British Egyptologist W.V. Davis expresses the first reservations about this piece's authenticity. Mainly, he actually is worried about about the hieroglyphic text that ran along the two faces of the chairs. And it was discovered that the text is absolutely identical to that on the Cairo statue that was published by the French Archaeological Mission in 1916. And when that piece was made public in 1916, the two statues were acknowledged as forming a pair, despite that there is a difference in the size of those pieces. Now, even though the texts were absolutely identical, there was some abnormalities. On the throne of the British Museum piece, some of the signs are missing, some of the signs are wrongly interpreted and represented in a particular manner or poorly produced. He also discovered there are cracks and wear and tear that had been produced artificially by using a chisel. So trying to make it look older by chiseling it in a lot of ways. So in his opinion, he assumes that this is a modern copy of the text from the Cairo piece onto that of the British Museum piece, making some errors of interpretation. And you can see there is some paint that is still present on some parts of the piece. And when they did pigment analysis, the leftover paint revealed that it was modern. It was not ancient. Essentially, probably based on the material of the paint, things that ancient Egyptians would not have had access to. And so both of those were actually not sufficient enough to cast out the piece for a lot of different Egyptologists. And so he actually had to like then go back in and like really hammer down his opinion. Mainly the paint one, a lot of people were just saying, oh, well, dealers sometimes touch up the paint. So they thought that was why it was modern. And so then he does kind of go into the unconventional features of this thing, mainly focusing on this horrible wig. And also, you didn't mention, the straps of her gown are completely not covering her nipple, which is how they would be. They should be going, like, they are very thin, and even in Old Kingdom and stuff, they're very thin. They should be going straight up rather than like on the side. No statue has something like that. Yes, she is freeing the nipple. That is not typical. Also, it's very interestingly how they're depicted on the back side. But the biggest thing is the gaps in the wig. So like, yes, this is weird. Typically, ancient Egyptian wigs were shorter in the back sometimes, not that short, but also the freestanding wig. Ancient Egyptians would never, absolutely would never. And even if they did, this would have broken off so easily. So easily. Oh yeah, absolutely. They probably had most beautiful outfits. Hi Tapir, welcome. You're just in time for my favorite scandal. But yeah, so today the British Museum has been won over by Davis Conclusions and considers this beautiful piece an exceptional fake made in the 1880s. She is a fully fake piece that people were conned to thinking is an ancient Egyptian piece about a really rare queen. So that's what we're talking about today. We're talking about all fakes and forgeries in ancient Egypt and kind of the scams and scandals that have happened. So let's talk about my favorite one. This is the one I've been dying to talk about and stuff. This one, God, the side angle is just wild. But this is called the Amarna Princess Scandal. I learned about this in grad school. Kardashian dynasty. I learned about this in grad school, and this one is wild. So just buckle in, guys, because it gets even crazier and crazier the deeper we go into this. So let's all look at this like we don't know it's a fake. Okay, let's just all look at this I'm going to tell you the story of what happened before people knew it was a fake, and then we'll talk about how it was discovered to be a fake. So, in this case, the Amarna Princess is a reference to a statue called the Bolton Amarna Princess. So, specifically silver, yes, it does not look like typical ancient Egyptian art, but in comparison, it does look like Amarna style art, which Amarna style art, although I will say, in comparison, I don't think this one looks as much like Amarna style art as they think, but when you look at the entire grand scheme of Amarna, of ancient Egyptian art, you have idealism, Amarna art, which is this mixture of more realistic and also a weird version of idealism. Like a not that you are like the sexy, like idealism is based on what you want to be perceived as. Amarna art is a different type of idealism, but it also, some people have interpreted it as more realistic, because it is a little bit, but it also does have this kind of wide range. So in comparison to all that idealism, this is not it, but this is more in line with the Amarna period. Though, I love the Amarna period. This from the front looks like Amarna period. This from the back is not the Amarna period. Amarna is a location. So Amarna represents Tel El Amarna, but it also then is called the Amarna period. Very quickly, Tapir, and for those who don't know what the Amarna period is, it is essentially a time period in the late 18th dynasty during the New Kingdom, where one pharaoh named Akhenaten, or originally named Amenhotep IV, and then he essentially, a couple years into his reign, decides to change a lot of how the ancient Egyptian world works, including taking one god and putting it on a pedestal above all the other gods and kind of moving away from the typical religion, changing the entire art form, moving the entire city to Tel El Amarna, and it only lasts for about 14 years. So it is a very small time period in comparison, but this guy Akhenaten is Tutankhamun's father, and so Tutankhamun goes back to the original ways that everyone is doing, and the world continues on kind of that way. The key things about Amarna art, it's more realistic. Big butts, big soft bellies. Yes, Nefertiti is from that period. Nefertiti is the wife of Akhenaten. Yeah, you're right, Tapir. So very lots of fat in a lot of places, lots of curves, and low-hanging bellies, large lips, large nose, large almond-shaped eyes, very pointy, large ears, very curved fingers. Each of the fingers, they kind of curve up, and the same thing with toes. And then because the pharaohs after Tutankhamun didn't want everybody to remember him, a lot of his pieces, a lot of his monuments were purposely destroyed. So you get these half-finished, well, not half-finished, but destroyed pieces like this. And so this is where this all is coming together as you guys are kind of forming your opinions of looking at this piece. So the basic story is that a man named George Greenhalgh approached the Bolton Museum in the UK in 2002 with this statue. And he claims that it came from his great-grandfather's forgotten collection, and it was bought in an auction from Silverton Park. And Silverton Park was a home of the 4th Earl of Egremont, George Wyndham, and there had been an actual auction of a sale of his estate in 1892. Yeah, it was. Akhenaten, essentially, he dictated how he wanted art to be depicted, and so he hired specific court artists, and you can assume that probably most of it came from the direction of Akhenaten, but then maybe the artists kind of took it in their own wing and then continued it on. But yes, it's very much, everything is made by the court. Everything is made by the pharaoh. Very much. No, AU dude. Because we've kind of determined the whole reason of a forgery is for somebody to scam it, that it isn't a legit object, but if it's coming from ancient times, then it is not then a forgery. Yeah, Star is corrected. Very exaggerated at the beginning, getting more realistic over time. But still not the standard of Egyptian art, for sure. This guy, George Greenhalgh, his great-grandfather supposedly had bought one of the 2 Egyptian statues that had been in that auction from 1892. We are on Twitch, no one. We're dual streaming over on Twitch as well. Same username if you want to join us over there. Yeah, I'm reading off of 2 chats if you guys can't tell. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. So George pretended to be ignorant about its true worth or its value, but he was very careful to provide letters showing how the artifact had been in the family for over 100 years. He claims that he was going to use it as a garden ornament, and that somebody had told him that he valued it at 500 pounds. So the Bolton Museum decides to pass the piece on to others to evaluate in accordance with their stated best practices. In first instances, this role fell to Christie's auction house, who valued the statue at 500,000 pounds. The British Museum also did agree that it was a genuine piece. So it can be noted that it has not been revealed exactly what test or what criteria was used to assess the authenticity beyond the provenance, which is the history of who owned it, because it had been provided. So George had given letters, he had provided the catalog, the original catalog from this auction, and it seemed to be authentic. And again, we're talking about Amarna art, and so you're looking at this piece that is severely damaged. The head is missing, the arms are missing, the bottom half, the legs are missing. But this is what Amarna art looks like, unfortunately. It is a lot of pieces. It is very rare to find a perfect, like, it would be, if this piece was in perfect condition, it would be automatically seen as a forgery if it was an Amarna piece that is in perfect condition. That doesn't, it is pretty. I think it's pretty. I think it's a little odd. I love Amarna period art. I think it's not as pretty as some of the genuine Amarna art. But yeah. I don't believe there is any evidence of paint. An original Amarna piece would have probably been painted. But yes, original Amarna pieces would have, oh, interesting. I didn't think about that. That is what it is. It is a side lock, which I can show you guys. This is my replica of the Amarna period bust. So that's exactly what it is. A side lock is essentially you have all your hair on one side, and then for young boys and young princesses, you would shave your entire head except for a big like ponytail on one side. But yeah, so this piece that's right up here is supposed to be this bottom portion of the side lock. This is like a genuine replica that I bought when I was in Egypt, but when you actually look at the piece that this is supposed to be replicating, I think it looks nothing like it. I think this is too pretty, which is kind of weird to say, but yeah, it's kind of weird. So it goes through all the processes. People are saying it's a genuine piece. And so the Bolton Museum takes the advice of the people that are probably more qualified than them, because the Bolton Museum is a small museum. I don't even think they have like an Egyptologist curator. So that's why they are kind of using these larger antiquities firms to kind of suss out what they're thinking, how big. I think I would be pretty good. When people find things, they're more than welcome to like send me the images. I do not have it enough to like fully say yes or no, but there are definitely certain ones that I will look at and say that is absolutely a fake. But there was actually somebody from a museum. He was from a natural history museum, and when he found in an Egyptian, something that was labeled as an Egyptian piece in the collection, and he sent me a message. He's like, "Can I send this to you?" And I was like, and he was very honest. He was just like, "I know that you're not really qualified to do it, but can you give me your expert opinion if I will be laughed out of a antiquities firm if I send it to them?" And so I looked at it, and it looked really good. And I said, "Okay, I think you are fine with sending this to somebody to authenticate it, because it doesn't obviously look like a fake to me." And I'm actually curious. I'm curious if you ever heard back about it, because it did look real. Like it could be real for sure. So The Bolton Museum decides to purchase the Amarna Princess for £439,767 in 2003, which makes headlines around the world. This is an insane price for this piece. The museum considers this purchase a coup, since the statue was purported to be maybe worth up to £1 million. An explanation of its apparent cheapness was that the vendor, so the George Greenhalgh, said that he wanted it to stay in Bolton. He did not want it to go to any other larger institution, because he was local. He lives in Bolton. So after it was discovered as a fake, they listed where all this funding came from. So $360,000 came from the National Heritage Memorial Fund, £75,000 came from the National Art Collections Fund, $2,500 came from the Friends of the Bolton Museum Fund, $2,500 and $1,500 came from a trust. So this piece went on public display at another museum called the Hayward Gallery in 2003, which was opened by Queen Elizabeth II, which cracks me up as just like a random thing that's getting added into this whole thing. No, this is not money laundering. Yes, the person who faked it was money laundering, but all of that money did come. They wanted to prove that essentially by releasing where all of the money came from, the museum wanted to prove that none of the museum money had come from the council, essentially. That it all come from outside funding, essentially. So it was on this Hayward Gallery, and then it was supposed to be at the museum was a celebration of hundreds of years of saving art for the British nation, which is also just like the worst and is like not a great look, to be honest. And then by 2004, it returned to the Bolton Museum in one of the main galleries, set among other ancient Egyptian items. Oh, sorry. Oh my gosh. There was also extra security installed due to a theft in the museum a week before it was reinstalled. So, how was it exposed as a forgery? Oh, okay. Wake me up. Okay, so it turns out that it didn't initially come from an investigation of this actual piece, but came from an investigation on the Greenhalgh family. So Scotland Yard's Arts and Antiquity Unit were investigating the family after they had triggered suspicions when they tried to sell another art piece with the exact same provenance to the Amarna Princess. So essentially, they tried selling some Assyrian friezes, so Near Eastern art, that had also supposedly been from their great-grandfather's collection that had been purchased from this 1889 auction. And that, for some reason, was flagged as weird, that there were two pieces that had a similar provenance and being sold by the same family. Excuse me, sorry. Which is weird to think about because technically, like, that's how it works. Like, that's how a lot of these pieces are sold, is through these, like, larger collections and such. But you live and you learn. I guess these guys were pretty good. So the investigation ends up impounding the Amarna Princess statue in mid-March 2006, less than 3 years after it had been fully purchased. And the father, George Greenhalgh, and two of his sons were caught, and the scheme unraveled. So, turns out that, can I change the next slide? I'm just gonna skip it too. So it turns out, during a 17-year period, the son, Sean, seen here, his mother and his father on either side of him here, had been producing a large number of forgeries, ranging from ancient Assyrian reliefs, the Amarna Princess, 10th century silver vessels, a Roman silver plate, a Paul Gauguin ceramic sculpture, an Anglo-Saxon ring, still life paintings, sketches, and watercolors, a variety of artists. There is a full list on Wikipedia under Sean Greenhalgh. I can't say his last name. On his Wikipedia. Yes. Essentially, there are 120 forgeries that are known to be made by Sean and sold by his parents and his older brothers. And this is the real reason of, like, I cannot say that this guy's not a great artist, because he is. He is genuinely a great artist, for sure. He is a cocky money laundering schemer, though, so there's on that side of it as well. So how did he create this Egyptian piece? So they have been doing this for 17 years. Sorry, Sean Greenhalgh. You can also look up the Amarna Princess, has its own Wikipedia page. Then you can get to his via that. But yeah, the whole list is on the Wikipedia page. Although there are others that he has claimed that he has done that haven't been proven as well. So, yeah, I do agree. Interesting and irritating is some good terms for him. So, essentially what happens is in 1999, after the family had already been selling quite a few pieces and forgeries, they began this project that was probably one of their most ambitious. They had a copy of this 1892 sale catalog of Silverton Park and used this as the scheme for giving this piece more authenticity. Among the lots that were in this sale was a group lot comprising of, quote, a draped figure of a female, 5 marble statuettes, and 8 Egyptian figures. So it's so vague. The catalog was just, like, genuinely so vague. And because it was 1892 when Amarna art wasn't necessarily, like, easily recognizable and talked about, they determined that they essentially could say, oh, well, this draped figure of a female is the piece, is the Amarna Princess. And so it appears that even though he didn't have any access to the internet, he was able to trace catalogs and books and work from photographs of similar pieces that are at the Louvre and the State Museum in Pennsylvania. And he created the 52 centimeter tall statue made of translucent alabaster. What is a straw man? I'm not sure. What is a straw man? A lawyer? So it turns out that he probably created this copy. Well, no, we know he created all of his forgeries in a shed in the backyard of his house. And he claims that he created the entire statue in 3 weeks out of calcite. And I quote, comma, using basic DIY tools and making it look old by coating it in a mixture of tea and clay. No, so he used calcite. It is supposed to look like alabaster, but it is calcite. The person that takes place of the original seller or buyer compensate. Oh, I don't believe so, no. Because they were all 3 of them were convicted. The mother, the father, and the son. I almost said it in the Holy Ghost. So it looks very similar to the piece at the Louvre, though it is a couple inches taller of that piece. And of course, after he finishes his piece, this is where his father steps in to sell the piece to the Bolton Museum, pretending that he doesn't really know the authenticity of the value of the piece. And this was like a full gang. This is called, they kind of are jokingly called the Garden Shed Gang. And the parents are George and Olive, and they would approach the clients. The older brother, George Jr., would manage the money, and then Sean was the creative one in the back shed. This is always so funny. It just makes me laugh. The Garden Shed Gang. Sean is a self-taught artist. He had a job as an antiques dealer for a while. And again, I'm very impressed by his work. His work is very, very good. This is one of his pieces. And because he can do everything. He can do sketches, pastels, watercolors, sculptures, busts, statues, even silver work. Like he was making silver goblets and jewelry and things like. And one of my favorite quotes from the investigation was a detective who said, quote, "There were blocks of stone, a furnace melting silver on top of the fridge, half-finished and rejected sculptures, a watercolor under the bed, a check for 20,000 pounds dated to 1993, a bust of an American president in the loft. I've never seen anything like it." Supposedly he did make a bust of Thomas Jefferson. That's on the list. One of the weirdest ones. That's very, again, out there. Even the Egyptian one was very out there. He was mainly like doing paintings and sketches and stuff. But like the Egyptian and the Assyrian ones, maybe that's why, I don't know, that they were discovered easily. Because again, it was doing this for like 17 years. But he also was like very cheeky and daring. Claiming he could create a Thomas Moran watercolor in half an hour and to complete the Amarna statue again in 3 weeks. It's estimated that the family could have earned as much as 10 million pounds by selling the 120 artworks that we know were forged by him. This is one of those pieces. This is a Paul Gauguin forgery he created. And this is him at the Bolton Museum, where you can see the Amarna piece is here, in a case that talks about copies and fakes. So George, Olive, and Sean pleaded guilty. At first they did not plead guilty, but they eventually pled guilty to creating the forgeries and laundering the money that they received in 2007. Sean was sentenced to 4 years and 8 months, while his mother received a 12-month suspended sentence, and his father was kind of old, so they delayed his for medical reports in 2007, and eventually he received a suspended sentence of 2 years. Many have said that it was the provenances that went with the pieces that tended to sway the art historians, and that now, essentially, if the art historians looked at the pieces without the provenance, they would have seen quicker that they were forgeries. Oh yes, absolutely. That's probably the collector says that the Bolton Museum has probably more visits because of the forgery. Absolutely, it does. I would love to go and see it in person. It was a huge scandal though when it hit, and the Bolton Museum was not happy, obviously. Actually, that's the next part that I'm gonna say. But yes, there is a list of the experts and institutions who were fooled by all of his forgeries, including the Tate Modern, the British Museum, the Henry Moore Institute, auction houses of Bonhams, Christie's, and Sotheby's, along with many, many other experts. So after the scandal, the Bolton Museum scrambled to distance themselves, described itself as blameless, insisting that it had followed the established procedures, and the council conducted its own investigation, and the judge exonerated the institution and any council staff involved because of the deception. The craziest thing about all of this is that after Sean was released in early 2010, he launched a website selling his artwork. In 2015, he also claims that he was the creator of a painting attributed to Leonardo da Vinci that he had made in the late 1970s when he was around 20, using vellum recycled from a 16th century land deed and the face of a supermarket checkout girl named Allison who worked in Bolton, which is my favorite. My favorite. Art historians have said that this claim is hilarious and also ridiculous. It is probably because he made that claim around the time that he published A Forger's Tale, the memoir of one of Britain's most successful and infamous art forgers, which is his autobiography. So as I said, the British Museum, or the Bolton Museum, still has the piece. It is in a case talking about fakes and forgeries, which I think is very honorable for them, because to be honest, if they tried to sell this piece, it would make a shit ton of money because of this scandal. I'm telling you. I don't think it would make a crazy amount. Like, I don't think they would make the 500,000 like they did when they purchased it, but like, yes, I believe in some way. Well, the family was very weird. They didn't live in this life of luxury. They had like a really shitty house apparently, and it wasn't like very well kept and stuff. So that's a very good question. I think so. I'm assuming so, but honestly, that was not in the Wikipedia article or in the article I read. I suddenly realized. But they were convicted, so, but they also pled guilty, so I don't know if that changes things. Okay. We're so close to being done. They paid off some debts and repaid the roof. Yeah. Okay. He also bought himself a nice set of teacups. You're fine, Kuro. The Amarna period. Gordian, go to sleep. The rest of this will be on my YouTube eventually, or you can watch it on my Twitch for like 2 weeks after the stream. I'm a New Kingdom girly. Good night, Gordian. I'm New Kingdom. I really prefer the Amarna period. This one. Well, I feel like the last one we talked about, the Teddy Sherry, is probably the biggest because it was on display for so long. Like, this was like such a quick little thing. Yeah, I would probably say the Teddy Sherry statue is probably the biggest, like, most famous object that, again, sat in the British Museum for like 90 years before being discovered to be a forgery. I would probably say that one. This was a big scandal, but it was just recent, and obviously it was only in the museum for like 3 years before it was discovered to be a fake. All right, my other favorite reason why I wanted to talk about this, do this lecture, is because of this fucking weird ass thing that I don't know what to think of this. It's just this whole thing. So, speaking of the Amarna period, there is also this very strange collection that, yes, looks like aliens. I know. This piece is just like so. So, this entire collection is probably made out of forgeries, and I'm gonna let you guys decide for yourself, because I only discovered this really recently, and it's so weird because there are still people that truly believe that this is still real Amarna art. So this is called the Mansour collection. So it is one of the most hotly disputed collections of the Amarna period sculpture, collected mainly by the antiques dealer M.A. Mansour. So, scholars have considered the collection to be fake. However, there are some that are still comfortable to say that some of these are genuine. And I definitely prompt you guys to go and look at the Wikipedia for M.A. Mansour, because it is one of the most corrupt and misinformation and fake Wikipedia pages that I've ever seen out there. And the only reason I had to go on Wikipedia is because the vast majority of how this collection is talked about on the internet is if it was accurate. And so I was having a really tough time of finding a neutral source to talk about this. I was able to find one because it is talked about in the book that we mentioned, but it is like crazy how corrupt this Wikipedia page is. Because there's no citations, and it's very much pro this is a real collection. It's also really has a stupid inaccuracy on the first page, on the first line, where it says he resigned from geography in 1777, even though he only lived from 1881 to 1968. So, yes, that was one of the quotes I was gonna say. Mansour studied every object he possessed and consulted with many experts and connoisseurs he knew. Every object was dated to the best of his knowledge. It's like, what the fudge? That entire Wikipedia is just like hysterical. So yeah, so Mansour was born to Coptic Egyptian parents in Cairo in 1881. He was very skilled in Arabic, English, and French, and taught Arabic to some foreign officials who occupied principal positions in the Egyptian government, although there is no source for that one. There are more, so just get ready for this. So the story goes that in October 1904, he approached the Swiss manager of the Shepherd's Hotel in Cairo to rent showcases in the hotel lobby. He intended to display and sell a collection of ancient Egyptian sculptures, bronzes, amulets, faience figurines, and jewelry that he had acquired over the previous years. Eventually, the two showcases became a small shop in the main hall of the hotel, and he later opened more shops in other hotels and a large gallery across the street from the Cairo Museum. Up until that point, it appears that most of the pieces he probably was working with were genuine, although I cannot really confirm any of it, but it appears that he, like, obviously had the reputation of being a good seller of antiquities and stuff. Yeah, the eyebrows are crazy. And the lips, look at these lips! The lips annoy the shit out of me. Yeah. So the Shepherd's Hotel, was very known for selling finds, and he was part of it for a while. So it appears that his Amarna collection specifically started with 2 Amarna heads in the year 1924, and this grew into a collection that claims to be the world's largest private collection of Amarna artifacts, and he claims that they were acquired over 20 years from a single unnamed source. And at least that's what the Wikipedia said, but my Ancient Egyptian Fakes and Forgeries book says that the pieces were obtained from a Coptic antiquary from Kenna named Tawadros Girgis Gubrial. A whole long thing. And the belief of the Mansour family, because again, it is still to this day, this family is very convinced that it is still real. And so the belief of the Mansour family is that these pieces come from one sculptor's workshop, similar to the workshop of Tutmos, where the famous bust of Nefertiti and other Amarna pieces were discovered, mainly those at the German Berlin Museum. But instead of these being properly excavated by archaeologists, obviously, somebody just found this workshop and has been exclusively excavating these and giving these to the Mansour family. And again, he was very trustworthy, I think, before he started forming this collection, and he had a great relationship with the officials in the Egyptian Antiquities Department. He was allowed to get export permits to send these pieces to other countries and stuff. Yeah, that's what I'm saying, is that prior to it seems 1924, a lot of his things were real, but this is the exception, is that he kind of got obsessed with it and such. That would be really funny, Tea Time Cat. So in turn, there are 106 heads, statuettes, and reliefs attributed to the Amarna period, but there are no cross-checks to exist of the actual origins of this collection apart from these relatively corroborative accounts that have been provided over by the descendants of Mansour. No, they're not. They are bad I'm not even gonna say replicas. They are bad forgeries of the Amarna period art, which does look weird, but not this weird. But welcome on in, Samantha. We're talking about ancient Egyptian fakes and forgeries. He just sells them. So apparently the story goes is that this Coptic guy was slowly but surely giving these pieces to Mansour, or selling these pieces to Mansour over 20 years. To be honest, I don't... Maybe that's the guy who was making them and he was just selling them to Mansour, and Mansour was just so convinced that this was actually this, or Mansour knew that they were all fakes and he was just sticking to his guns, man. So apparently at one time, someone encouraged King Farouk of Egypt to purchase some of the Amarna heads for his collection, but the king had already assigned Egyptologist Alfred Lucas to the task of examining 27 pieces from the Mansour collection. Albert Lucas helped with the Tutankhamun excavation. He was a chemist at the Cairo Egyptian Museum and a big authority. Lucas did confirm that these were ancient, but he was also, again, looking at these pieces as a chemist and not as an art historian or archaeologist. So, like, he was not, like, he's looking at the authenticity of, like, the stone itself and, like, so I will say, I do have this piece that looks like it could have been from the Mansour collection. Like, truly, I think they could look like, because of the way his eyes are, like, slanted upwards. I honestly think that it's obviously not from it, but it does have serious vibes that look like it's from the Mansour collection. These are all probably they're kings, essentially, for the most part. I was gonna say, looking at, yeah, these are all kings, and then we get to, but these are all gonna be kings and stuff. It also has the V mouth, exactly. That's why I'm like, that's so weird that looks like it. Boop, 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 boop. So, where was I? So yeah, so Albert Lucas did confirm that these were ancient, and then he got a second opinion from another person, and he also said that they were ancient, but again, he's focusing on the surface patina of these pieces. And essentially what was lucky for the king and unlucky for Egypt is that the political situation was very unstable, so the king had to send his collection to the United States, and he never bought these pieces. So, another option was that the Metropolitan Museum of Art was interested in purchasing some of the pieces in 1947, and they hired Dr. Young of the Boston Museum, who published a devastating report against these pieces. The appraisal concluded that they were not only fakes, but made out of a synthetic conglomerate material, not even from limestone. Thank you, no one. I try my best. I've been streaming for 4 years, and so we do get derailed in other ways. But I'm also really tired. I have to pee so bad, and I have to go to a conference tomorrow, so I'm trying to rush through this a little bit at the end. We're very close to the end. But I was hoping to finish at 10, so we're about a half an hour late. But we're pushing through. We're pushing through. So if you don't recognize, this piece is like almost it's a bad copy of an actual Egyptian piece from the Amarna period, and then this is a relief carving that is almost identical to a painting from the Amarna period. So these two are just like direct copies of things that we already know about, but honestly they're bad copies. Like, they don't look like a Tinkle Time. Oh my god, I love it. Oh, I'm so glad, Samantha. Thank you. I would never give tests because I hate that portion of teaching, and so this is like what I like and stuff. Like, this is what I like, not the test and things like other things. So yeah, so this Dr. Young said that it was a synthetic conglomerate, and there was a serious reaction after this report, so he agreed to redo it, and he re-examined it in 1949, and he did conclude that they were made out of limestone, but he still said that they were fake. These pieces have undertaken so many examinations over so many years, and there are so many back and forth where some people say they are real and some people say they are not. There are some really, whenever you look up the Mansour collection, there's a couple websites that are defending that they are real, and they list out like all of the papers that you can read and all the quotes from all these Egyptologists, and it's crazy. Like, they just are like so adamant that these are real. And like, it's kind of interesting that like this is still the descendants of this guy who are really, really trying to, like, they haven't really concealed the conflicting opinions, but they like attribute them to like incompetence, like clannishness, or the refusal to take results of scientific appraisals as truth. Like, they just like go way deeper into it. And for those of you who are here when we did all of our different discussion streams about the Amarna period, like, I really want you to look at these images, and like, I hope that you guys see the differences as plainly as I do, because they are crazy. And if you have never seen images of the Amarna period, look up images of the Amarna period and then look up pieces from the Mansour collection, because you will see the differences in like the legit pieces and stuff. And these have no archaeological context. These have no provenience. Like, it's so, they don't have any backing at all. And it's not like the Amarna site has not been excavated for literally over hundreds of years. Like, how does this one person have this, like, how does this one person have such a monopoly over this one site where they are taking all of these pieces from it? Like, it just doesn't make any sense. Okay. Yes, if they do, if their eyes look like alien eyes, they are kind of from the Amarna period, but like, yeah, exactly. This is the one, which I did just see something where that is purported to be a fake, and I'm like, I don't know what to tell you guys. All right. We only got, oh shit, this one's so long. 3 more scandals. This is a long one, but I will say it as quickly as I can. So this is the Necho Scarabs scandal, and I wanted to talk about this one because it has really nothing to do with art itself, but with language and with the hieroglyphs. And so I really wanted to talk about this. This is not talked about on the internet. The only reason I know about this is because of the book. I could not even find actual pictures of them. I had to literally take a photo of the pictures in the book. And this starts with a widow of a French Egyptologist that you see here, Urbain Briand, who had directed the French archaeological mission in Cairo for over 10 years. He contracts a disease in Cairo and dies in 1903. And his widow apparently ran a tobacco shop for a while in Nantes, and their orphan son Pierre was going to be an Egyptologist like his illustrious father and was studying for his doctorate in Paris. And apparently he had married a rich woman when he was young, and then he squandered her her money, and then the couple had separated, and so he'd been like serious financial difficulty. And what he essentially decided that he was going to make a fake pharaonic object to sell it so that he could get money from profit of a museum. And in 1908, his mother submitted to Professor Alexandre Moret, the curator of the Museum Gumet, an engraved scarab, which you can see here. She claimed that this piece came from her husband's dig at the site of Bubastis, and this piece stood as proof of the truthfulness of Herodotus's account, in which the Saite king Necho II had ordered the Phoenician navigators to circumnavigate Africa by the Cape of Good Hope. I was going to read out the entire text and how it is translated, but we do not have the time. If I remember, somebody reminds me, I can type it out later, but it is in the book. Page 172 if you guys buy the book. So the curator has no reason to mistrust his friend's widow and didn't doubt her word for a second, because archaeologists would take pieces for their own collection when they would go on excavations. So he purchased the piece on behalf of the museum, paying 2,500 francs for it. A few weeks later, the widow and her son decided to put up for sale a second scarab designed as a pendant piece to the first, and bearing the text of the expedition report from the messenger's mouth. You can also read the text. It's also on 72. Here's what that one looks like. I am reading this from my notes because I take notes. But you can read it in the book Egyptian Fakes by Jean-Jacques Fleischer. Is on 172. I just don't have time to read the whole. It's actually a really long text translation. I don't have time to read it. So they sell the first one for 2,500 francs, and then they decide to put another scarab up to sale as kind of a joint. It's like a matching one that has the text of the expedition report from the messenger's mouth. And in this case, they decide to get in touch with Jean Capart, who was the assistant curator of the Royal Museum of Decorative Industrial Arts in Brussels. The young Egyptologist, this guy was 23. 23, guys. He goes to Paris to go see the scarab, and again, trusts the family's origin story and purchases the scarab in June 1908. And to top it all off, he ended up also buying the first scarab from the Museum Guimet. He bought both of these scarabs for 10,000 francs, and he triumphantly brought his scarabs back to Brussels. Now, the announcement of this discovery of these scarabs, not really the scarabs themselves, but again, the text. Like, the text is the most impressive at this point. Was a really big deal. Flinders Petrie wrote about an article about the find. Other Egyptologists were giving praises to this find. But shortly after, the scientific community soon expressed its doubts. Maspero had his suspicions, but surprisingly, actually not surprisingly, it was a scam. The German Egyptologists were the ones who had the most doubts. They were deeply acquainted with all known Egyptian texts at that time due to their participation in compiling the Wörterbuch, which is a large text of ancient Egyptian texts. And so, just to add to the drama, we have like actual letters from all of these different individuals talking about this scandal as it seems to unravel. So Capart was very adamant that it was still correct, and that he, that's what you do when you spend 10,000 francs on something, is you say that it's actually the same, that it's real. And so on August 4th, 1908, the day before the International Congress of Historic Sciences, I forgot to also write this. This is Capart, and this is Alexander Moret. These are the two Egyptologists who purchased the scarabs. So before the International Congress of Historic Sciences, assembled in Berlin, where Capart was going to present the Brussels scarabs, German Egyptologists Ehrmann and Schaefer handed out to the participants a text of the paper they had delivered a few days earlier at the Prussian Academy of Science, in which they provided information proving the scarabs' inauthenticity, which I believe is what this, I can't read in German, but it says von Aldorf, Ehrmann, and Henrik Schaefer, so I believe this is the article that they published. To them, it appears the inscriptions were engraved on the scarab, were actually composed of bits of sentences taken from genuine documents. And essentially, the forger had brought together these snatches of sentences with complete incorrect grammar that would have been unthinkable for an ancient Egyptian scribe. They did admit that it was skillful, but that it was a product of someone with no great knowledge of the ancient Egyptian language. From Moret's correspondence, which is archived in the college in Paris, provides an insight into how the parties received this condemnation. On August 6, Capart wrote to Moret, "The storm is raging here. The entire Berlin school is absolutely convinced of the falsehood. Legrain is hesitant. Maspero is more than suspicious. The opinion that the texts were made recently appears to be gaining ground, and then you suspect who might be the author." Thank you for the shamrock. 2 days later, Capart was convinced by the German Egyptologist argument, admitting that they had to take a stand, that both scarabs were fake, and that they were likely made not so long ago. And by August 10th, he was even more assertive to the fact that they were fake, and that most likely Pierre was the creator of the scarabs. So this is the son of the man that supposedly had collected these. And honestly, the drama keeps getting crazier, as all of these Egyptologists attended the conference had to sign a declaration affirming that these scarabs were inauthentic and had some of the biggest names in Egyptology. And I honestly kind of feel bad for Capart because remember, he's 23 years old. He's super young. He's the first Belgian Egyptologist. He was essentially shamed into acknowledging this error and signing at the bottom, which I'm glad that he did, but thank you for the dolphin and the rose. After hearing the scandal break, the widow tried to clear herself with two injured parties, these two French Egyptologists. She insisted that they were still correct and the German Egyptologists were wrong, and that she was going to look through her husband's papers, that he would have published the piece if the disease had not, like, killed him and stuff. The Society of Friends of the Brussels Museum demanded that the family reimburse Capart for the 10,000 francs. The money was not returned, and there were rumors that the family had used it to help depose the king of the Maldives to recover the throne of his ancestors. That's probably just a rumor, but it's kind of crazy. And I will say on February 10th, 1909, the 11th Chamber of the Magistrate Courts of convicted the widow and her son. She was sentenced to 8 months imprisonment, and the son was to 2 months, which is crazy that the son only got 2 months, but I guess, I don't know. I guess because she sold it. I don't think there was actual proof that he created it. Both were jointly sentenced to return the 10,000 francs, to which was added 5,000 francs for damages. And essentially 2 years later, the reimbursement had never appeared, and it kind of died after that. Meeting report of the Prussian Academy of Science, the 30th of July, the alleged Egyptian report about the circumnavigation of Thank you for translating that for me. That is exactly what it says. That's exactly what it would say. Yeah, that's amazing. I love thank you for translating that. So the real question is, who was the author of the scarabs? The one theory is that the father had originally imagined the text and possibly wrote it in his papers, and then the son probably engraved it. And what appears to have been the truth is that the son hired a Parisian sculptor and commissioned him to create these two scarabs in his father's memory. But the sculptor actually used a stone called Burgundy stone, which did not exist in Egypt, and proves it's definitely a forgery. Okay, next one. There's only 2 more, and these are all short ones, so we're almost done. So one of the smaller scandals of ancient Egyptian fakes, we're going to look at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in the 1980s. And this is the scandal of the 3 goblets of the 3 foreign wives of Thutmose III. So, so we got these beautiful, these are actual objects, I will point out, because I don't have a good picture of the pieces that are the forgeries, but these are actual objects from this collection. So in 1916, Mohammed Shaban of the Egyptian Antiquities Department and Howard Carter discovered the tomb of 3 Near Eastern princesses in Wadi El Garud outside of Thebes. This tomb was for 3 minor wives of Pharaoh Thutmose III, who reigned between 1504 and 1450 BCE during the 18th dynasty. They're not bullets, they're toe stalls and finger stalls. And they get put on your fingers because your skin is supposed to be made out of gold from the god's hair. The hair is made out of lapis lazuli, their bones are made out of silver, and their skin is made of gold. And so you put these little finger and toe stalls over your fingers and toes when you were mummified, for the rich and famous, pretty much. So when Howard Carter and Shaban had found this tomb, looters had actually gotten to their tomb ahead of time, but like not in antiquity, like literally like local robbers from like modern day in 1916 had gotten to the tomb very much ahead of them, and it's stolen a lot of the pieces. And so Egyptologists had to essentially then look at the Luxor markets and dealers to try to find these objects that had been stolen from the tomb like really recently in comparison. And so essentially Howard Carter was able to collect about 250 different items that are thought to be from this lost tomb. And thanks to Lord Carnarvon's funding, Carter was able to purchase most of this treasure, which he then resold to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. Henry Winlock was the museum's curator and made this exceptional find public in 1928. And between the years of 1972 and 1983, the Met started to do a comprehensive reevaluation process of the estimated 40,000 works in their Egyptian department. And this was a requirement for every department that was undergoing major changes in installation had to go through this systematic review. And yes, gold is antimicrobial. I love this because it's little cats, which is nice. So this is the best image that I can find of these pieces, but and the news article from the 70s or the 80s. Using the most up-to-date scientific methods and instruments, the forgeries were discovered. One of the most important tools they used was an electron microscope, which enabled researchers to get an unprecedented magnification on the surface of gold. This revealed the inscriptions and the gold had been engraved rather than traced, which was customary in ancient times. Tracing or incising is shallower than engraving. They had also discovered that the inscriptions on the beakers, which it's hard to see, but there is an inscription on either side, were found to have been partially covered up by the folded edges, which suggests that in contrary to ancient practice, the inscriptions were applied before the works were fully fashioned. No. No, sadly not. We don't know where the toe is. The last toe. But you are right that if you're thinking of Ramses III, who was assassinated, he did have an injury to his toe. But we are talking about Thutmose III and his wives. These are all for women. Queens that were foreign wives that were pretty much sent to like marry Thutmose. But yes, you are correct. You are correct too that he did have an injury to his foot, but that's Ramses III. XMF, probably. Absolutely. Yeah, there's just a golden toe out of there. I would have to look it up because I don't know the numbers of the tombs off the top of my head, and I probably don't have time to talk about it now, sadly. Where was I? We only got one more thing to talk about in this lecture. I literally can't find it. No! Talk as much as you want. Absolutely. You are allowed to do whatever you would like. I'm glad you guys are here. Oh, okay. I know where I am. So, after going through this process, it discovered that 17 gold vessels were part of the original collection from this tomb. Other pieces from the collection are still displayed. As you can see, these pieces are all still on display. But again, I haven't been able to find any actual pictures of these pieces. It's unclear if they were deaccessioned. There are just a lot of tombs that, or a lot of objects that seem to be from this collection that don't have pictures that are accessible on their website. And I also mentioned that the tomb was re-excavated by the Metropolitan Museum of Art in the 1980s, and there is a PDF of the entire excavation, including some of the finds. That the article is free on the Metropolitan Museum of Art's website, and there is a catalog of objects assigned to the tomb, but it doesn't mention these pieces, which is unfortunate. So we got 32 people on Twitch, which is lovely, and 11 people on TikTok, which is great. Amazing. Yes, but if in the 80s the deaccession process would be too complicated. By the 80s, yeah, I would just assume it's still in the collection somewhere. It's just not labeled or anything, and wouldn't be on display. Alrighty. Is this the last thing? Yes, the last thing before the conclusion. But hi FICO. No, you're totally fine. Welcome on in. We're just wrapping up, but we got one more fake and forgery to talk about, which is the Sadig Gallery scandal. So this is, again, very recent in comparison to a lot of the other things that we're talking about, which is why I wanted to mention it, because like these things still happen, and I want people to like understand that like fakes and forgeries still happen to this day, so please always be mindful. So this is the Sadig Gallery in New York City. It was established in 1978 as a small mail order company and then moved into a suite of offices in 1982 on Fifth Avenue in Manhattan. They advertised that they had ancient Anatolian, Babylonian, Byzantine, Greco-Roman, Mesopotamia, Egyptian, and Sumerian items. In late 2020 and early 2021, among the items listed for sale was a mummified falcon dating to 305 to 30 BCE for $9,000, an Egyptian sarcophagus carved from wood dating to 663 to 525 BCE for $5,000, and an iron and nickel fragment from a meteorite that landed in Mongolia for $1,500. In 2021, it was revealed that Murdog Sadig, a New York City antiquities dealer who operated the gallery for decades in the shadow of the Empire State Building, was creating bogus copies of ancient antiquities. For many, many years, the gallery promised customers rare treasures from the ancient world and instead sold them pieces manufactured on site in a cookie-cutter fashion. According to prosecutors, the gallery sold undercover federal investigators a gold pendant depicting the death mask of Tutankhamun and a marble portrait head of an ancient Roman woman, paying $4,000 for each. The investigators found hundreds of fake artifacts displayed on shelves and inside glass cases, as well as rooms behind the gallery where scarab statuettes and spearheads were in different stages of preparation. Surprisingly, this entire investigation went down by the Antiquities Trafficking Unit, which appeared to not actually be investigating actual antiquities being trafficked, but a scam many years in the making. There appeared to be an assembly line process that was designed to distress and alter mass-produced items so that they would appear ancient. They found varnish, spray paints, a belt sander, and mud-like substances of different hues and consistencies. Hysterically, the investigators recognized that there was a copy of the 11th century ceramic Khmer sculpture of Buddha in the gallery, in which the original had been seized by the district attorney's office in a separate case. So of course, this investigator recognized it immediately, as it had to have been a copy. And then, to top it all off, there were other items in the gallery that appeared to have been modeled off of objects that had been stolen from the Iraq Museum, in which this particular investigator had a hand in investigating when he served as a Marine colonel in Iraq in 2003. Again, perfect timing. This investigator would have easily, like with just one look, recognized these items as fakes. I think this is my favorite picture, because I will say, like, a lot of these items, like, these ones are typical, but a lot of these items I'm very impressed with. Like, not that they're, like, genuine, but these are things that I just don't see copies being made of, sort of. Like, I'm more impressed that they're, like, these are sort of little weird canopic chests and stuff, and I feel like I've never really seen objects like that being made into copies and stuff. Yeah, these people were meant to be caught. AU dude, yes. I, as a Egyptologist, it is unethical for me to own any ancient Egyptian or any archaeological pieces. This is both as an archaeologist that I am, and museum educator, and also Egyptologist. So it is unethical for me to own any of these items. Anybody else is more than willing to do those, but it is unethical for me to do so. And I don't really believe in private collections, because not because of shit like this, but because of other things. And so I kind of jokingly earlier said, like, I would own a fake if it was like 100% a fake. Like, I'd own a fake. I mean, technically all this stuff is fakes. They're just not like being marketed as real. But yeah, it is unethical for me to own any artifacts. Thank you, Thordal. That's very kind. Yes. Do not ask me anything about that because I don't. It is it's a conflict of interest in a lot of ways, because it is. I work at a museum, and so it would be unethical for me to purchase an item that should be in a museum, because essentially it is the belief of professionals that museums are the best people that can handle objects and have the money and the funding to be able to protect artifacts, and so, but yeah, you are absolutely, no. Nowadays, Egyptologists, it is very rare for them to own actual pieces unless they have been, like, passed down from other people. But no, it is technically quite unethical for us to own these. That's why whenever you see a private collection is a person that just owns it. Usually not an Egyptologist, but there are exceptions to the fact. There are people who have, typically the older generation Egyptologists might have some pieces. But also, I don't get the goddamn money to do it. As it is, like, I'm a museum professional. I get paid nothing. Like, yeah, I just don't believe in private collections, and I don't want to purport that private collections are a good thing. This is no shame to anybody that has them. It's just not something that I am comfortable encouraging, because I do believe that these pieces should go back to Egypt or go in a museum. Those are like the two options, technically. But there's no shame to anybody who does it. That is just my own personal opinion. Now, where was I? Oh, it was after this. Do I have another picture? Oh, no, I don't. Mr. Sadig was arrested and originally pled not guilty to the charges of scheming, defraud, grand larceny, criminal possession of a forged instrument, forgery, and criminal simulation. But in November 21, he did decide to plead guilty to 7 felony counts. In court, he said that to hide his deceptions, he hired a company to flag and remove and bury Google search results, which is my favorite part of this entire story. And online reviews that suggested that some of what he sold might not have been authentic. This is what modern forgeries are, is that somebody has to, like, literally hide Google reviews, which is so funny. Bye, Nat. Yeah, we're about to wrap up. I need to wrap up, like, right now. He also admitted to getting others to post glowing fake reviews as well. And I could not find the final result of what he was sentenced with, but it appears that he was recommended for only 5 years probation, but banned again from ever involving in the sale of antiquities and stuff. Also, though, this Sadig gallery website is still up and running, so you guys can look at it today and see how they're, like, lying on it, which is really funny. Cheap, common, not scarce artifacts that would be easy and ethical to get on a trip to Egypt. Not in Egypt. So there are souvenirs that you can get in Egypt, but if you are found leaving the country with an artifact from Egypt, you will get flagged and you will potentially be arrested, even if you technically bought it ethically. One of the only, like, literally, if you wanted to buy an artifact, you'd have to buy it from an auction house. You would absolutely get flagged if you tried to leave Egypt, to be honest. So our final conclusion. Those are some of the stories of the fakes and forgeries. There are quite a few that I didn't have time to mention. There's, like, the Master of Berlin is one of the ones. There's the Mond Head. There's a lot of really specific ones that I didn't have the time to talk about. Definitely promote to you guys to read that book. It's really easy to read. It was really cheap on Google and stuff. Not Google, on Amazon. the last thing I'll just like leave you guys with is I want you guys to think about the ethical implication of fakes and forgeries, whether or not they should stand in the same spots as actual genuine Egyptian artifacts, whether they should be put behind the scenes, never seen again, maybe even potentially destroyed. And I want you guys to think about like how fakes and forgeries are different from replicas. So in this image is an exhibit of Tutankhamun replicas that goes around the United States. I saw in DC, and it's very misleading in a lot of their marketing because they don't really advertise that they are replicas. But like, what do you guys like? How do you guys see the difference between replicas and fakes? And thinking about kind of the ethical implications of these. And a lot of people have mentioned it's like, oh, well, you should just make a replica of that. Like, so let's say the Rosetta Stone, like things that Egypt wants back. People are like, well, the British Museum can make a replica and then they can send the real one back. Like good replicas are very expensive to make, and that has been like one of the excuses that a lot of these museums have created. And so and that some people will think that it's disingenuous if you're looking at a replica versus the actual piece. And so I kind of want you guys just to think on that as you kind of go about the rest of your days and your nights. This is where we are going to end. There are museums that definitely have like replicas only and stuff. But yeah, it's just like an interesting question to kind of put that out there in the world, thinking about replicas and pieces and like if fakes should be taken off. I personally like when fakes are either put on exhibit or they are put in a special exhibit just about fakes and kind of the whole concept of it. But like, is it disingenuous? Or a replica, which is a perfect replica of an actual piece that you have, is that better? Is that not?